Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
Andrew looked around the apartment. The previous tenants had done a good job. There were cigarette butts lying everywhere. The room smelled of tobacco smoke. It was impossible to breathe. It didn't bother Andrew much, though. Any apartment could be resuscitated. If only there was the will. Andrew was also of the opinion that everything could be sold, even air. You just had to know how to do it. "Have you already invited the cleaners?" he asked his colleague, who was standing next to him and looking at all this horror. "Yes, they are on their way. And these pinchuk you have already taken. A long time ago. Now it's just a matter of time." Andrew's been handling this kind of dirty money for over 8 years. He had a college degree. And now he's a realtor. In our country, people with such a profession get pennies in the beginning, and after that too. Andrew did not want to earn half his life pennies, so he joined the so-called gang of realtors. They worked like regular realtors, but they had one thing in common. It was often illegal. However, quite easily Andrew found alcoholics or people who were no longer able to somehow take care of their non-privatized apartment, drank them, and took them out in the open field, and then bribed notaries and registered their colleagues and dubious friends in these apartments. The scheme worked perfectly. Yes, the activity was dangerous and illegal, but it brought good money. After registration, these people privatized and sold these apartments, and then fairly divided the earnings. Everything worked like a Swiss watch. "Still, I'm glad I found you," the leader said. "When did we decide to celebrate another successful deal? That kind of determination and charisma is to be envied. Yes, there are better guys than you, but you have a lot of potential and you'll go far in the future. I know that." Andrew learned every day from his seniors. Which tenants are best to avoid? Which ones won't cause problems? Who to sell these apartments to later? How to bribe notaries? All these questions had quite sane answers. Soon Andrew himself began to give lessons to less experienced comrades. One day Jan asked, sitting next to Andrew, "What if the police? What will the police do to you?" Andrew answered the question with a question. "I'm a real swindler. It's a criminal case. Fraud." "So Ian, you seem like a smart guy, but if you're smart, the police won't get to you." "That's not an explanation. You don't need an explanation. Don't be a rat and everything will be fine." Soon Andrew was out of the business. No, his scams weren't over. He just moved on to a new niche. In those 8 years, he'd made a lot of money, but that wasn't enough for him. He didn't want to stop there. After all, if the system of life could be broken, he could continue to play cat and mouse. No one ever suspected him of these frauds. The people who made deals with him were happy with their new apartment. And these homeless people, whom Andrew's friends took somewhere in the countryside or in the fields, somehow lived out their lives there. However, Andrew didn't care about them. The only thing he cared about in life was money. And fortunately for him, he knew how easy it was to get it, without hunching over in a stuffy office, spoiling his posture and killing his health. One day a great idea popped into his head. Andrew immediately began to realize it. "So you want to offer me such a sum of money for this case?" asked the head of the company. "Let's be honest, you're not going to keep building one way or the other. I am well aware of your current financial situation. Eventually, your money will run out and the company will go bankrupt. And I'm offering you a win-win." Andrew reasoned with a smirk. He knew that sooner or later this man would agree to the deal. "What makes you think we're on the verge of bankruptcy? The company is growing nicely. I have connections and smart people whispered in my ear about your situation. It's just a matter of time. And soon you'll be out of everything," Andrew continued. "You know that very well. I'm offering to save your hides and possibly your families." "Do you think that's legal?" the manager asked incredulously. "How can it be legal? Don't be ridiculous." "Of course it isn't. But I'm sure you won't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You have a family, don't you?" "Yes," he nodded. "And how will I provide for it when the company is in debt and loans?" "That's none of your business," the manager said. "I'm just guessing," Andrew shrugged. You know, there are plenty of companies like yours out there, and smart people wouldn't turn down an offer like that. I'll give you an hour to think about it. Andrew left the office, knowing that he would be called back in an hour. So he waited. In fact, it happened even faster than he'd anticipated. He was called back in 15 minutes. Andrew, very satisfied, went into the office and sat down again on that cozy white chair. "Good," said the manager. "But why do you need it? Do you have nowhere to put your money?" "That's none of your concern," Andrew replied. "The deal is good for you. That's all you have to worry about." The manager hesitated for a moment, but then gave up and said firmly and confidently, "I agree to the deal." "Good," Andrew rejoiced. "Then we will sign the necessary documents and you are free to go." Andrew had been hatching this plan in his head for a long time, and now he began to act. He bought the so-called apartments at a terribly cheap price. And the construction company didn't mind. They were really on the verge of bankruptcy, which Andrew saved them from, you could say. These non-existent apartments he planned to now put on sale, and competently organizing an advertising campaign to earn a fairly large amount of money. Having signed all the documents with the developer, Andrew paid the agreed amount of money and was left with these apartments, which did not even have walls yet. It was time to take action. A man of about 50 years old walked into the office. A couple of gray hairs could already be seen on his head. Andrew invited the guest to sit down and asked the secretary to pour him some coffee. "Good afternoon. Are you here about the apartment?" Andrew asked. "Yes, of course. Why else?" replied the man. "I was just looking for a suitable apartment to move into and came across your website." "Great. I hope you are aware that these apartments will only be ready in a year or two. New construction. You know what I mean?" "Yes, of course. The scheme makes perfect sense to me." "It's not for nothing that they call it distant," nodded the client. "You know, many acquaintances say that you should be very careful when choosing a developer, after all, such money. But I've read various reviews of your company, and I'm happy with everything." Andrew wanted to jump with happiness. Of course, all these reviews were written by bots or people who didn't care what to write reviews on. All that mattered was money. Andrew had it all figured out down to the smallest detail. "Yes, I agree with you, the developer must be reliable," he nodded. "But don't worry, everything will be documented and notarized. Let me show you our plans." Andrew unfolded a brochure with apartments and the future look of the house in front of the man. The client immediately fell for the colorful design and paid the full amount. After an hour of conversation, then half an hour with the notary, and all the fake documents were drawn up, and the first money was received. Andrew was beyond happy. His brilliant plan was working. He had never thought before that there could be such simpletons in the world as this man. Meanwhile, the line to the office for the bargain was already forming. In one day, Andrew was able to get more than 20 million. Of course, all this did not count against the company, whose employees were Andrew's friends. Everyone played their part. There was no reason to be suspicious, and there was no reason to be suspicious. "Mom, I'm home," Elsa announced loudly as she stood on the mat in the hallway. She took off her shoes and heard her mother's shuffling footsteps on the floor. "Honey, why are you home so early?" Adelaide wondered. "Yes, my class was canceled. They said there was no point in having a history lesson now that no one was taking the exam. It's better to study at home for the important subjects. Oh, I didn't even have time to make soup. I somehow slept until 10 today, but I can afford a day off." Elsa smiled. "Oh, Mom, you have no idea how some people dream of a day off in the middle of the week. They envy you. But your mother works on Sunday, while normal people lie in bed." "That's right," Elsa grinned. "I'll go while I do my homework. Call me when something's ready." An hour later, Adelaide called her daughter for lunch. "The soup is amazing, Mom," Elsa marveled. "I still don't understand why Dad left you." "You see, these men don't know anything about true happiness," joked Adelaide. Elsa finished her soup, drinking bread, and continued. "Listen, Mom, you know that in a month my birthday is coming up, 18 years old after all. Do you mind if I invite my friends over?" "Oh yes, of course I don't mind," my mother smiled. I could even go. No, don't go. My friends love you very much. Stay and have fun with us. Is my cooking good? I'll be the only one cooking that day. Are you sure? Why don't you go to the country house or Kira's? Mom, I'm sure I convinced my daughter. I love you madly and I want you to spend this important day with me. You should know what I'll give you, intrigued the mother. All the girls will die of envy. New cosmetics, dresses, perfume? Elsa began to guess. No better. I'm sure you'll appreciate my gift. Adelaide had been sitting outside the office with the wooden door for half an hour. She had not been summoned. Finally, they let her in. Good afternoon, my name is Andrew. He smiled. I'm Adela, and I'm sure you're the only one who can help me make the best gift for my daughter. I'm all ears. Adela made herself comfortable in the chair and began. I would like to buy a one-bedroom apartment somewhere on the 15th floor. The main thing is to have a view of the sunset from the windows. Do you have one? Sure, Andrew replied confidently. So you're ready to sign? Don't you want to hear the price? Adela was embarrassed and shook her head. You see, I wanted to show you something more valuable than money. Andrew was intrigued. He approached Adela, who was pulling something out of her purse. She pulled out a small wooden box and showed it to Andrew. What's in it? The man asked. Adela smiled and opened the box. Andrew's eyes sparkled. He was looking at a blue stone, shimmering with all the colors of the rainbow, decorated with gold and small diamonds. It's a blue garnet, very rare in nature, Adela explained. This pendant is a family heirloom. I was going to pawn it, but I thought I'd show it to you first. Andrew's eyes sparkled. He tried to take the box, but Adela closed the lid, almost pinching his fingers. He pulled his hand away and looked at the woman with a smile. I don't think you need to go to a pawn shop. We're willing to take this pendant as payment. Adela was very surprised, but not confused. Are you sure? Is it legal? Of course it's legal. The notary is here for a reason. Kieran. Andrew nodded towards the lawyer sitting with a folder. Adela glanced at Kieran. He looked very young. Is that your lawyer? She questioned. Yes, Andrew smiled. He looks like a schoolboy, but he works very well. Shall we do it? Adela bit her lip, as she always did when she was nervous. She had a difficult and important decision to make. Andrew, meanwhile, handed her the necessary documents. I can give you some time to familiarize yourself. Is there anyone you need to consult? No, I'm just going to go through the paperwork and... hold on. Can we see the apartment first? Adela, I thought I mentioned it wasn't there yet. You mean it's not ready yet? It'll be finished in 2 years, but we're already having a big buyout. I understand. But the foundation's already there, the walls. Why don't we go over there? And then I'd be happy to sign the paperwork. Andrew, of course, didn't like the idea, because he didn't want her to suspect anything. But Adela didn't seem like a very bright woman. She wasn't even embarrassed by the fact that he was willing to accept payment in jewelry. I don't think that would make sense. What's bothering you? I don't know. Would you like to be sure or something? Andrew smiled. He stood up and pointed the woman in the direction of the window. The windows overlooked a building under construction. There was really only the foundation and a small part of the walls. Construction had just begun. I can show you how we plan to do it, Andrew offered. Adela scrutinized the building from the window. Andrew did not understand the meaning of her actions, because the building had not yet taken on a presentable appearance. He handed her various booklets with pictures of apartments, courtyards, and playgrounds. Andrew wouldn't mind living in such a high rise, but he realized that all these pictures would remain pictures. Yes, Adela answered confidently. In a few minutes, they signed the necessary documents and Adela paid for the apartment with her expensive pendant with a rare stone. I hope my daughter will be happy in it, she said as she signed the contract. Thank you. Andrew felt uncomfortable. Yes, he'd spent his life cheating, but this situation suddenly stabbed him right in the heart. The woman seemed nice, and he didn't wish her any harm personally. But it wasn't his fault that everything in the world was based on money. "I can't take it anymore," admitted the lawyer with glasses, after Adela had left. "You can't what?" Andrew questioned him seriously. "Deceive people. You're the ones keeping me here out of my own free will." The last sentence infuriated Andrew. He stood up and said, "Not of your own free will? Who else is going to pay $200,000 a month to a lowlife like you? Nobody wants you. Nobody. And I gave you a chance to earn your own money. I'm sick of it. Are you going to be millionaires at this rate? This is a criminal case. A criminal case." Kieran stood up, collected the documents in his folder, and headed for the exit. "And where will you go?" Andrew asked him in a nervous but stern voice. He never allowed himself to show weakness in front of his colleagues and subordinates. They must not think that they had won or could somehow hurt the boss. "Anywhere. And I'd rather work for pennies than for you," Kieran said his last words and left the office. Andrew stood in a daze for a long time, and then sat down in his chair. He realized that this was the end of it. It would be impossible to find another person with a notary license to forge documents in such a short time. The matter was further complicated by the fact that Kieran could turn Andrew into the police at any moment. "Laurel, please bring the statement of our income. I need to know the final amount," Andrew called the secretary. A few minutes later, a huge folder lay on Andrew's desk. The amount earned pleased him. He realized that he could close the business. No one noticed how he withdrew all the money from the company account and transferred it to his card. In a few more minutes, he was already walking down the office, meeting the surprised faces of his colleagues. "Andrew, where are you going?" a coworker asked him. "I have to show a client a house." Andrew tried to get out of it. "A house? But we agreed that we don't show anyone the house." "Didn't you explain it to her?" "I did, but she wanted to be sure." "I'll just show her the building and she won't suspect a thing," Matthew said. But Andrew's coworker seemed to suspect something. Matthew looked around incredulously at Andrew and his belongings. "All right," he replied uncertainly. "Go." An hour later, Andrew was already sitting in the airplane and preparing to leave the country. "Matthew, Matthew," yelled one of the employees, running up to his friend. "What's wrong? Why are you yelling like that?" Andrew ran off and stole all the money. "We don't have a dime left in our account." The doorbell rang almost every minute. Elsa welcomed guests who brought her many gifts and flowers. Her best friend Nabu and friend Emily came, along with 5 other friends and classmates. Elsa escorted each one into the living room and sat them down on the couch. Her mother continued to prepare the cake, which she planned to finish making in an hour. "Are you sure we need such a big cake?" Elsa laughed. "We'll have to eat it for 3 more days." "Mom, it's not a wedding." "You're turning 18, you're an adult now. This event is even more important than a wedding, so don't you dare stop me." The woman didn't give up. Elsa smiled and left to her friends. While the dishes were cooking, they decided to play board games. "My mom gave me earrings for my coming of age," Emily complained. "I hope your mother will be more creative." "Even if my mom gives me a candy bar, I'll be happy. After all, the main thing is that I have her," confidently answered Elsa. "I agree," supported her Nabu. "Parents are only a part of our lives. We should appreciate every moment with them. After all, one day they will be gone, and all of us will regret that we did not tell them how much we love them, that we complained about the gifts. And then we'll miss that attention, their support." "Well, you know," Emily continued resentfully, "my brother got a car for his birthday, a car. Damn it. You can always buy your own car." "But you won't always be with your parents," Nabu said. "You'll regret hugging them later, but it'll be too late." "Okay, guys," Elsa interrupted them. "It's actually my birthday today, not a wake. So stop talking about death and who's going to be sorry for who." "Yeah, sorry," Nabu said, embarrassed. "Guys, the table is set, waiting for you to sit down," came from the kitchen. Everyone immediately rushed to the table in the kitchen. Some of them had not eaten all day to taste the delicious dishes that Elsa's mother cooked. She was a master at it. "Thank you," Elsa thanked her friend again. "I'm glad you have the same opinion as I do. Now let's go celebrate my day and have fun." Everyone sat down at the table. Some had already pulled off the sausage, others were eating Caesar salad. Adelaide tapped her glass lightly with her knife to get everyone's attention. She stood up and, raising her glass, began. "I am so glad that we are all gathered together today to celebrate the birthday of the person most dear to us, my daughter." Adelaide met Elsa's gaze and didn't want to break that eye contact, for it was her she was addressing. "My little girl turns 18 today. This number means a lot to every person, because he or she is entering adulthood, full of adventures and problems." Of course, everyone laughed at these harmless but correct jokes. "I know that my Elsa is very determined," Adelaide continued. "She achieves everything, and always. Nothing can ever get in her way. She can cope with all of life's problems. Let's drink to that. But not everyone here is 18. Can I have a soft drink?" Nabu said jokingly. Everyone laughed and then clinked glasses. Half an hour into the meal, Adelaide disappeared, and then appeared with a white folder in her hands, which was tied with a pink bow. All the guests were very much surprised at this spectacle. Elsa was especially surprised. She got up from her chair and went up to her mother. "Dear Elsa," Adelaide began, "I want to thank you once again for having you. You have helped me all these years. These documents contain your gift." Elsa took the folder and started to open it. She pulled out her keys from there and a file with the papers neatly laid out in it. After reading a few lines, Elsa realized everything. "Mommy," Elsa exclaimed with joy, throwing herself into her mother's arms. "God, Mom." "What's there? What's there?" asked friends, snatching the folder from each other. "This is the apartment," joyfully shouted Elsa. "An apartment. Now you can gather there with your friends even every day." "Laugh, laugh," Adelaide smiled. "Adelaide, without your approval there is no point in gathering," Nabu praised her. Mom cried with happiness. "Elsa, thank you. Thank you, you deserve it," Adelaide replied tenderly. The next morning was the happiest morning of Elsa's life. She got up early, put on some music, brewed coffee, and made delicious cheesecakes. Mom was still gone, but Elsa realized that she was very tired. Yesterday they had cleared the table until 2 in the morning and washed the dishes afterward. An hour or two passed. Mom still did not come into the kitchen. Then Elsa decided to surprise her. She put a couple of cheesecakes in a plate, poured her mother's favorite syrup over them, poured coffee, and with a tray in her hands went to her mother's room to arrange her breakfast in bed. However, when Elsa opened the door to her mother's bedroom, the tray nearly fell from her hands. Her mother was sitting on the bed with a lost face, watching television with tears in her eyes. Elsa immediately put the breakfast tray on the table and ran up to her mother. "Mom, what's wrong with you? Are you what?" Elsa looked at the television screen. The news was talking about some people being detained, but it wasn't clear yet how it concerned her mother. Adelaide was silent and paid no attention to her daughter. She called out to her and tried to get her mother to look at her. "Mother," Elsa shouted nervously once more. Only after this cry did Adelaide look at her daughter. Her mother's face was swollen, her eyes red from crying. Her hands were trembling. "Mommy, what happened? What did you see? Did something happen in the city? Did someone die? Mommy, answer me." "I'm so stupid," Adelaide replied in a shaky voice as she continued to cry. Now the tears were rolling down onto her daughter's pajamas. "Mommy, can you explain to me what happened?" "No, first, give me a sedative." Elsa jumped out of bed and ran to find a sedative in the medicine cabinet. She found it quickly enough and soon returned to her mother. When she drank the pills with water and calmed down a little, she sighed and began her heartbreaking story. "They tricked me, my daughter." "Oh, cheated. Aren't they ashamed?" "Somebody tricked you? I wanted to make you happy. And those devils knew everything, but they didn't stop me. Egotists, thieves, scum." "Mom, be more specific. I don't understand anything." Didn't I buy you an apartment? Yes, you did. Why? What's wrong with it? Look at the news. Elsa looked at her mother in disbelief and then turned on the TV. The news said that members of a gang of swindlers had been arrested. They deceived people by selling them non-existent apartments. The circumstances are being investigated. Mom, what does it mean? Elsa asked excitedly. I bought an apartment from this real estate development company. They offered such beautiful views from the window, and I didn't even suspect a thing. How stupid of me. Who sold you the apartment? Elsa stood up abruptly. We'll go to the police right now. Right now. Who's going to help us? They don't know all the details yet. We'll file a complaint. We should get our money back. I'm sure I'm not the only one who fell for this scam. Come on, let's go to the police. Elsa started to collect her mother. She gathered all the necessary documents, took the damn folder with the apartment contract and took her mother out. They got in the car and drove to the nearest police station. Is this your signature? The investigator asked Adelaide, pointing to the document. Yes, it is. Adelaide sobbed. But I didn't think they had anything. It's just an ordinary company, said the investigator. It says here that you didn't pay with money, but with a valuable pendant. Didn't that make you uncomfortable? A little, Adelaide answered through her tears. But afterwards I thought it was a way of paying. What difference does it make whether I take it to a pawnbroker or pay for it immediately? Adelaide, in this country we only pay with money. Where did you get the information that you could pay for an apartment with a pendant? I don't know, Adelaide continued to sob. The investigator handed her a glass of water. Go outside, get some air. Then come back and we'll find out, I promise. The guard kindly opened the door for Adelaide. Her daughter met her in the corridor. What's going on there? How is it? Elsa asked her questions. It's not good, my dear. I'm the fool. A normal person would not give the pendant, which was passed down from generation to generation, to a crook. No one will compensate me for anything. It's all my fault. I'm sorry, Laurel. I robbed you of your apartment and the family jewel. Mom, what are you talking about? I tried to cheer her daughter up. You're not the only victim of these things. They'll find them. They'll get what they deserve. You'll be compensated. They sat down in the waiting room and waited for something. After half an hour, one of the employees came up to them and told them they'd better go home. But how can they go home? Adelaide was indignant. The investigator said we would continue the conversation. He has already made certain conclusions. We'll call you when we know a little more. We will do everything we can to make sure you are compensated for the damage, but they will not return the family jewel, the mother cried, leaning on her daughter's shoulder. The police officer said nothing more and left, leaving the poor family to relive the grief. The following days were very disturbing. Adelaide would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming from nightmares, drinking sedatives. After a week of this torment, the results of stress and sleepless nights were already visible. Elsa also had a hard time. Not only did she have to study for exams every day, but she also had to do housework. Adelaide couldn't even get out of bed, and there was no one to cook dinner. Someone has to scrub the floors so that the apartment doesn't get dusty and dirty. And waking up woke Elsa Nabu. The bell rang a long time ago, he said. Elsa raised her head and looked sleepily at her friend. You slept through a whole lesson. Stella gave you a 2 and is calling your parents to school, Nabu informed her. Elsa began to slowly throw her notebooks into her briefcase, muttering under her breath. Let her call. No one's coming anyway. Elsa, how much did you sleep today? Nabu asked. 2 hours, Elsa whispered. So it's Friday. How much sleep have you gotten this week? 15 hours, tops, Elsa whispered. What do you care? Elsa threw her backpack on and headed towards another office. What do you mean? What do I care? Nabu resented. I'm your best friend, and in the future, maybe your fiancé. I don't care about your silly jokes, Nabu, Elsa replied with disgust. I have enough problems without you. Nabu realized that her friend was completely unwilling to make contact, so he simply blocked her way forward. "Get away," Elsa shouted. "I'm not moving away until you explain what's going on." "Get back, you idiot. I'll call the teacher." "I may be an idiot, but I'm not going to step away. Come on, tell me everything." Elsa stopped, pushed with her foot, and exhaled. "All right, I'll tell you." They walked over to the window. Elsa put her things on the windowsill and only then began. "Do you remember what I got for my birthday? How could I forget such a thing, an apartment? Well, this apartment is not an apartment at all. Mom bought it from scammers. They just collected money from people for apartments that aren't built yet, and then they just ran away. Well, not exactly. Turns out there was a ringleader that my mom made the deal with. His name was Andrew. He had his own crew. But Andrew betrayed his own. He collected all the stolen money and left for parts unknown. And his colleagues decided to take revenge on him, to expose all their dark deed. But they should be held accountable. There should be compensation. The authorities promised they'd look into it, but I don't trust them. It's complicated by the fact that my mother paid with family jewelry. There was no money, so there's nothing to pay back. It's a nightmare. My mom is under so much stress. She doesn't drink, doesn't eat, doesn't sleep well, has stopped cooking or doing anything around the house. She was fired from her job because of her numerous absences. She is developing a real depression, and I don't know how to help her. Maybe she should talk to a specialist, a psychologist, for example. He might be able to solve the problem. After all, I persuaded her to come to at least one appointment. Just to talk, she flatly refuses. She doesn't want to, that's all. And that doesn't make me feel any better either. The housework she used to do, I do now. And when I finish my homework, I only have 2 hours to sleep. Nabu put his arm around Elsa and then said, "Elsa, I'm your friend, and I'm willing to help you. This weekend I'll persuade my mom to go to a psychologist, and I'll help you with your homework. Please don't refuse my help. I understand how hard this is for you, and I want to help you." "Okay," Nabu Elsa replied. When Elsa got home, the first thing she did was go to her mother. She looked haggard and exhausted. Her bruises under her eyes were getting bigger every day. She hadn't bathed in days. Her hair was disheveled. She resembled a homeless person who had lost everything. And all these days she watched TV non-stop. "Mom," Elsa whispered, entering Adelaide's bedroom. "Can you talk to me?" Her mother didn't answer. She was like a zombie. Before, Elsa would just walk away after such disregard for her existence. But this time she couldn't take it anymore. "Mother," Elsa screamed, "Mother." Adelaide didn't turn her head. It was as if she had lost her hearing. Elsa sobbed amidst only the annoying voices of reporters and journalists from the television. Elsa was almost losing her mind, and at one point she made up her mind. She went to the nightstand, grabbed a desk lamp, and threw it at the TV with all her might. The TV fell to the floor with a crash. Only then did Adelaide look at her daughter. She didn't say anything, just stared at her with her absent, lifeless gaze. It was as if she had become an emotionless vegetable who neither sees nor hears anything. Nothing bothers her, she just exists out of inertia. Elsa started shaking her mother to bring her to her senses. "Mom, come back to me. Wake up, wake up. I'm here, your daughter, Mom." "It's nighttime. Should I go to bed?" Adelaide asked calmly. Elsa wiped away her tears and looked at her mother in shock. Had this person completely lost her mind? Had she already forgotten that she had a daughter? "Mom, do you remember who I am?" she asked pitifully. "Laurel, what kind of stupid questions are these?" smiled Mom, wiping the tears that flowed down her daughter's cheeks. Elsa cried even more. Her mother remembered how long it had been since she had seen her smile. "Mom, let's you and I go to the doctor," Elsa suggested. "He'll help you." "Honey, let's talk tomorrow. I'm very sleepy." "Sure, Mom." Elsa put her mother to bed, and herself began to clean up the consequences of her stress. That TV had cost a lot of money, which they were having trouble with. Elsa wanted to punish herself for such a breakdown. In the morning, Elsa opened Nabu's door. "What are you doing up so early?" she asked. "We're still sleeping." "But we didn't agree on a specific time, so I thought I should come early. Am I right?" "No," Elsa answered softly. "I haven't even woken Mom up yet, but I can leave." Elsa rolled her eyes, grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and dragged him into the house. "Go to my room. I don't want my mother to see outsiders, especially in this state." Elsa pointed him to the right door and went to wake her mother herself. "Mom," she said softly, "Mom, it's time to get up. We have plans today." Booed Mom. Elsa remembered her mother waking her up in first grade. For many people, this early rising was stressful, but for Elsa it was an opportunity to hear the kindest words and eat the most delicious cheesecakes or pancakes. Adelaide woke up again in a terrible state. Elsa had already stopped paying attention to it. She dressed her mother, fed her, and led her to the exit. "I'll get the keys now and come back," Elsa warned her mother. However, Elsa cleaned up a bit. She ran to her room where Nabu was. "If you haven't had breakfast, there are a couple pancakes in the fridge," she turned to her friend. "Wait for me here. I'll be back in an hour. With or without Mom, I don't know yet." "Will do." Captain Nabu tried unsuccessfully to defuse the situation. They sat in the psychological center for an hour. They were invited to an appointment. "Good afternoon. We are here, and you." Elsa introduced herself and sat her mother on a comfortable soft chair. "Good afternoon. Yes, just one remark. I will need to talk to your mother personally." The psychologist addressed Elsa personally. "But I should explain the situation, right?" "That won't be necessary. I'll find out everything myself. Don't worry, your mom will be fine." Elsa thanked the psychologist and left the office. In the waiting room, she was offered coffee, but Elsa refused, so there was too much anxiety in her life. "What's up?" Nabu wrote to her. While waiting for Mom. "No news," Elsa typed to him. "Everything will be fine," he replied. Half an hour later, a psychologist came out to see Elsa. The specialist was excited. "Well, what is it?" Elsa asked in a trembling voice, jumping up from her chair. "Your mother's condition is extremely serious. She has a prolonged depression. Her brain is so unwilling to accept reality that it blocks out many memories and external stimuli. She can often talk like a 5-year-old, so she's trying to protect herself from everyone and everything. Yes, she watches TV all the time, often does not pay attention to me, even when I call her." After consulting with a psychologist, it became clear that Adelaide's condition is very severe and requires serious treatment. The psychologist recommended going to a psychiatric clinic where Adelaide could receive the necessary help and take care of her mental and physical health. Elsa took this with apprehension, as she had stereotypical ideas about mental hospitals. However, the psychologist reassured her that it was a good modern clinic. In addition, the psychologist advised her to be examined in a regular hospital, as Adelaide's condition was worrisome on physical grounds as well. Elsa followed the advice and went with her mother to the city hospital. "Where are we going, my daughter?" Adelaide asked. "We are going to the hospital, Mom." Elsa smiled, trying to hide her despair. After the examination, the attending doctor informed Elsa of the disappointing diagnosis. Adelaide had a brain tumor at the third, almost final stage. This explained her memory loss, strange behavior, as well as her thinness and emaciation. The doctor recommended keeping Adelaide in the hospital for further evaluation and treatment, although the chances were slim. "Of course," Elsa replied, her hands shaking as she tried to open the front door lock. Hearing the sounds, Nabu hurriedly opened the door to the returning Elsa. "Where's your mom?" was the first thing he was worried about when he saw Elsa alone. "At the hospital," Elsa replied in a trembling voice. Elsa answered Nabu tiredly and monotonously. "I gave her to the hospital." "Are you all right?" Nabu gently inquired. "It'll do, of course. I've been better, but at least my mom is getting help now, and I should be happy about that," Elsa replied. They walked into the kitchen. Elsa put the kettle on and sat down at the table, covering her face with her hands. "I'm sorry," Nabu tried to support her. Remember when you said not to mess around in your apartment? Elsa looked at him tiredly. Did you break something? Nothing. I just took the TV to the repair shop. Did your mom break it? No, it was me. Why? My mom was really sick last night. She was completely out of touch with reality because she was chained to that TV the whole time. I had no choice but to do what had to be done. How much did they charge for the repairs? Not much. I have an uncle who works there. I explained the situation, and he'll do it for free. Thank you. But you shouldn't have. Why not? I just wanted to help. I understand, but I'm the kind of person who hates to accept help. It's easier for me to do it myself. You've taken on an impossible burden. Elsa, let me help you, if not morally, then financially. Jesus, and in 3 months, exams, graduation. Please concentrate on your studies. I know it's hard, but I'll help you as much as I can. Thank you, you're the best friend I've ever had. From that day on, things started to get better. Elsa stopped skipping classes and started getting enough sleep. But the only thing that remained in her life was her mother. Every few days she came to the hospital to check on her condition. The doctors did not give a good prognosis. Despite all efforts, the woman was getting worse. Once, immersed in nostalgia, Elsa rummaged through old boxes and found many photo albums. The photos were all old, some of them barely recognizable. Elsa decided that Adelaide owed it to Adelaide to see this album, so the next day she hurried to her mother's hospital room. Mom, hi, Elsa said hello and entered embarrassed. Adelaide was lying on the couch reading a book. Hi, she replied casually. Adelaide looked happy, but Elsa knew the reason and it upset her. The doctor gave her mother special pills, which of course are bad for the nervous system. But the person really looks healthy and alive, but only looks. And here I am reading, Adelaide smiled. The doctor said it improves memory and cognitive functions of the brain. Elsa smiled sincerely, sat down next to her mother's couch, and took some albums out of her backpack. I'm here to refresh your memory too. They began to look at the album. But suddenly Adelaide snatched it up, flipped to the end, and ran her fingers over some of the photos as if they were soaked in memories. I haven't shown you these pictures before, she said. I don't know, I was afraid or something. Did you know that our family comes from a line of very rich aristocrats? No, Elsa replied. Well, they died during the revolution, but not all of them. Survived the children, your great-grandfathers. Not even ashes of that manner are left. But your great-grandfather managed to hide something very valuable today. His mother had a pendant, a wedding present from the groom gold with a rare blue stone inside. You know, it reminds me of that necklace from the movie Titanic, Heart of the Ocean. Elsa was amazed that her mother remembered everything in great detail. But it's not surprising Titanic was Adelaide's favorite movie. This pendant is in a drawer, in a wooden box. It's so precious to me, you have no idea. Only at that moment did Elsa realize which pendant she was talking about. The pendant that was the rent, or rather the heir. Adelaide cautiously hinted. Elsa, are you sure it's at home? Of course, I've never worn it. Elsa, we haven't got that pendant. Adelaide exclaimed after a moment's silence, remembering what had happened and why the pendant had disappeared. You could tell from her rounded eyes that she had remembered. Yes, she said sadly. Mom, Elsa cried, unable to contain her emotions at the sight of her mother melting in front of her eyes. Mom, I love you so much. I love you too, my daughter, Adelaide smiled. I am so happy that I had you. Elsa came out of the room with her mascara running and met the doctor talking to the girl at the reception desk. My mother, how is her condition? She inquired, wiping her moist eyes. The doctor looked at her with a serious look, and then suggested that she go to a less crowded place's office. We're doing everything we can, but the disease is progressing, the doctor informed her. But how is that possible? Elsa tried to find out. She was fine until a month ago, and now her condition is getting worse. What's the cause? We can't say for sure. It could be a genetic condition that developed under stress. Your mother needs support and care now more than ever. Will this help? It'll help her morally. But I don't want you to get your hopes up. The prognosis is bleak. We're doing everything we can, but a good outcome is unlikely. You have to be prepared for that. Elsa nodded. I'm terribly sorry, the doctor added. Your doctors, do something, I beg you. My mom is still young. She has to live. I promise you, we will do everything possible from our side. And from your side, we are waiting for support and moral help. I heard you. Days passed. It seemed that there were not 24 hours in a day, but only 2 miserable hours, which Elsa spent on trips to her mother. Adelaide was fading before her eyes, and from a cheerful hostess who could cook anything in the world, there was only a semblance of that kind mother. She began to eat less. She had no desire to speak or have contact with people. Even her own daughter, Adelaide, often ignored her, pretending to be asleep, even though everyone knew she was awake. This took a heavy toll on Elsa's psyche and physical condition. Her grades deteriorated again. The exams were only months away. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and in 3 days Elsa's graduation was due. She was already determined to spend it without her mother, as she had dreamed. But she did not suspect that fate was preparing for her a much more difficult test. Elsa borrowed money from a friend and bought herself the cheapest dress 2 weeks before the prom. She made it look good, and it looked even better than the dresses in the bridal salon. Elsa was proud of herself. Are you ready to graduate yet? Nebu texted her at night. You know, this graduation would have brought me a lot more positive emotions if it wasn't for the situation with my mom, Elsa replied to him. I understand, and hang in there. Remember that I'm with you. However, even this support didn't save Elsa at a crucial moment. At 3 a.m., she received a call from the hospital. The tired voice of the nurse on the phone said, "Your mother was very ill today. We had to perform an operation. We fear that she may not live to see the morning." Elsa jumped out of bed, and 10 minutes later she was rushing to the hospital. She rushed into the room and saw her dying mother. She was lying on the couch breathing through a tube. "Mom," Elsa whispered, approaching the closest person in her life. "Mom, I'm here." "The cancer's about to get her," the doctor said behind her back. "She may not recognize you anymore, but you try." "Mommy, it's me, Elsa, your daughter, remember?" she cried, clutching her mother's hand. "Elsa." Adelaide marveled. "Elsa, my daughter." "Yes, Mommy, your daughter," Elsa replied in a trembling voice. "I remember you," the woman smiled and coughed. "Sweetheart, he's taking me away." "Who's taking you away? Who's taking you, Mommy?" "God, he's already waiting for me. When I was asleep, he told me to say goodbye to you." Elsa turned away to hold back the cry that burst from her chest. "Say goodbye," she smiled through the tears rolling down her cheeks. "Well, let's say goodbye." "Laurel, I love you." Adelaide moaned hoarsely. You could see how hard it was for her to speak and strain her voice. "Mom, I love you too." Kissing her hands, her daughter said. "I don't want to die," the woman sobbed in a low voice. "But you know I believe in the heavenly world. If God wants me to, I will do his will. I'm so afraid of oblivion, of this eternal darkness." "Mom, you're going to the most wonderful place. Only good people go there, and you're going to go there. It's going to be so warm and fun." "I want warmth. I'm cold." "Yes, Mommy, it will be warm and there will be no suffering. You'll meet your mommy, you'll meet your daddy. It's the most incredible place on earth." Elsa noticed that Adelaide was no longer answering. She lay with her eyes open, staring up at the ceiling. "Mom," Elsa tugged at the woman. "Mom," she switched to screaming as she continued to rock her. Elsa didn't want to accept what she saw with her own eyes, but through the piercing pain she squeezed her mother's hand and leaned into the still cold body from which her soul had fled at that moment. "Mommy," Elsa whispered, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I love you so much." There were so many tears that the entire sheet enveloping her mother was instantly wet, as if it had just been washed. The pain Elsa felt at that moment could not be described. It felt like someone was slowly squeezing her heart. Her chest ached wildly, and she wanted to scream, but there was no strength to do so. The machine beeped sharply. The doctors rushed into the room and stopped a few centimeters from the couch on which the late Adelaide was now lying. They dared not move. Out of respect for their daughter, they stood with their hands clasped together and heard the quiet sobs of Elsa, who could not tear herself away from her mother's body. Elsa didn't know how much time had passed, minutes or hours. Someone put his cold hand on her shoulder. "Elsa, you have to go," a man's voice almost whispered. Elsa stood up, staggered, and stepped aside. 3 medics covered her mother's body with a black blanket, disconnected her from the life support machines, and took her to the morgue. Someone was whispering, saying something to Elsa's face, maybe ordering her. But she didn't react. When she was almost forcibly removed from the room, she woke up only in the waiting room. Before that, she felt as if she were in a dream. Now it was like she was alive again. "Are you okay?" the nurse sitting next to her asked. Elsa did not answer. She had no strength for anything. "Would you like a cab?" the nurse offered kindly. "If it's not too much trouble," Elsa replied. Ever since she was a child, Elsa had wondered why it always rained on mourning days. Does the weather know when to cry and suffer? On this day, standing outside the temple where her mother was being buried, Elsa thought about it. It wasn't just rain, it was a real downpour. Nabu was standing beside her, holding an umbrella. At this moment, while all the graduates were celebrating the beginning of a new life, Elsa was saying goodbye to a huge part of her former one. A coffin was carried out of the temple, carried to the hearse. Elsa never would have thought that her high school graduation would be remembered by this particular event. The pink dress she had purchased for graduation looked eerie among the black mass of people. The relatives of the late Adelaide were leering at Elsa and her outfit. "I hope at least my mom likes me dressed like this," Elsa remarked. "Your mom would like you to be in a dress like that," Nabu said confidently. "I'm sure she would love it. Or maybe I'm just too young and stupid to realize the seriousness of the situation," Elsa thought. I still can't accept the fact that I am an orphan at the age of 18. Nabu did not answer, realizing that words were useless now. Instead, he moved closer to Elsa and hugged her as tightly as he could. "I am with you," he said quietly. Adelaide was buried. A part of Elsa went underground with her forever. Things would never be the same again. Elsa will never be able to eat her mom's delicious cheesecakes or laugh with her again. There won't be those heartwarming conversations on Friday nights in the kitchen when watching a movie. Elsa will never see her mom's smile again. All of that is lost forever. Elsa walked home to the hoot and holler of drunken teenagers celebrating graduation, to the clatter of fireworks and the enthusiastic shouts of her parents. She wrapped herself in a warm sweater and raced home as fast as she could. Silence. It was never like this in this apartment, except at night. And now it was almost night. So Elsa imagined that her mom had just fallen asleep and she couldn't sleep. She brewed some strong tea, took out an old album from the closet and began to leaf through page after page. Her breathing became ragged and her fists clenched with anger when Elsa saw the pendant on her grandmother's chest. "I'm there, Mom," she whispered proudly and confidently. "I'm there for you where the gap is." The days of the fraud investigation passed. Everything went quiet. The investigators promised to continue the search. But Elsa already had little faith in these words. It was time to send applications to various universities. Many of her classmates decided to stay in their hometown, following the proverb, "Where I was born, there and came in handy." But this story was definitely not about Elsa. She was determined to move, and not to an ordinary city on the outskirts, but directly to the capital. Nodding, Nabu continued to rock Elsa on the swing, but was clearly upset by this news. "Why do you have to go there? Stay here," he urged. "What's keeping me here, or who's keeping me here?" Elsa sighed. "My mom is dead. I'm an orphan." "What about me?" Nabu remarked resentfully. Elsa paused the swing and looked at him. "But I can't stay here. This place is weighing on me. Every day I see places I used to see very differently. This is where my personal tragedy happened. You're running from your feelings, Nabu suggested. Perhaps, but I will be relieved. This place will no longer weigh on me like a huge weight. Elsa, you know why I'm in pain. Why are you doing this? You're hurting me. Nabu, you know the answer too. Our feelings are not mutual. I can never look at you as a boyfriend, and you'll never be able to see me as a normal friend. So what? That's it? The end of our friendship? I don't know. I think it's the beginning of something new. The sea is cleaner and more beautiful after a storm. But I am not the sea, and you are not the storm, Nabu objected. The sea is life, and the storm is the tragedy that has befallen me. I will go away. It will be easier for me. All right, Nabu replied resentfully. Do as you please. He cast one last glance at his friend and left with his hands in his pockets. Elsa made no attempt to catch up with him. She realized that this was truly the end. Nothing could save their friendship anymore, if it could even be called friendship at all. Nabu had just been chasing her all these years. She had turned it into a game called friendship. Elsa realized she was hurting the guy badly, but there was nothing she could do about it. She couldn't reciprocate, no matter how good he was. No matter how many good deeds he did, she would never look at Nabu any other way than as a friend. Despite her sadness, Elsa sprang into action. She knew she had many chances of getting into the capital. Her certificate shone with excellent grades, and her high U scores spoke for themselves. In addition, she knew French as well as a native speaker, all thanks to her mom, who took care of her education in time. Thank you, Mom, Elsa said, sending her documents to 5 selected universities in Moscow and looking up at the ceiling. All that remained was to wait for an answer. Elsa realized that some of the universities would definitely accept her, so she didn't waste time and started selling the apartment, which she needed to get rid of as soon as possible. Could you repeat, please? Why do you want to sell the apartment? Asked the woman at the viewing, who looked like a formidable and fair businesswoman with a straight posture and an extended neck. I'm leaving for Moscow for good, so I don't see the point in leaving my property here, Elsa explained calmly. Yes, but this apartment is not worth 10 million, 3 million at the most. Do you agree? No, Elsa answered firmly. You said that bargaining is appropriate. And this is not bargaining, but a desire for freebies. You've reduced the price by more than half. Are you out of your mind? The woman snorted and headed for the exit, tapping her heels. At this rate, you sellers won't find buyers, she said, and slammed the door loudly. However, Elsa did not suffer long with the apartment. Soon found people who were happy to buy it at an attractive price. These people turned out to be a young couple looking for a good apartment to renovate to their liking. Sergei, and the kitchen is great. Admired the girl. It will not have to be repaired. It will fit perfectly into our concept. Yes, dear, that's right, said the tired husband. When can we come over? He turned to Elsa. I'm leaving here in a week. The documents will be ready in a couple of days, she answered. First, you pay half of the amount, and then another part. When I give you the keys and leave. That's fine with us, said Elsa. Then write to us as soon as the documents are ready, the girl smiled. It's a deal. 3 days later, Elsa received letters from the universities. Each of them approved her application and gave her an opportunity to get free tuition. Elsa decided to choose the most prestigious option, Moscow State University. The letter also said that she would be provided with a dormitory. So now Elsa didn't worry about housing. Are you sure you have decided? Nabu asked her, trying not to meet her gaze. Sure, Elsa answered confidently, and with a smile as she left the house with her suitcases. Elsa, before the new tenants arrive, can I talk to you? Elsa nodded and they moved aside to the bushes. Elsa, our last meeting didn't end well, Nabu said. But I don't want you to hold a grudge. I don't like that kind of innuendo. And yes, I've already realized that I behaved wrongly. I shouldn't have pushed you so hard. I always knew this friendship would always be just that. A friendship. I'm so sorry. You're a fool, Nabu. I'm not the least bit upset with you and never have been. I know you're sad to part with me, but I'm sad too. I want to leave this place, but I don't want to leave the people who live here. These bright, friendly friends, neighbors, and regular passers-by. This town will forever be etched in my memory. I will miss this house and these hometown streets. It's really hard for me to part with it, but I have to move on. I'm going into my future and I'm not going to stop. Your mom would be very happy to hear you say that. Nabu smiled. A black car pulled up to the house, the doors opened, and the same young couple walked up to Elsa and Nabu. They were anticipating the moment when they would be handed the keys to their apartment. Good afternoon. George said hello. We're ready to move in now. How are you doing? Elsa pointed to her suitcase and her car on the sidewalk. Ready to move in too, she replied. In that case, check the balance on your card. All the funds have already been transferred, George said. Elsa opened her phone and confirmed what the man had just said. Then she took the keys out of her pants pocket and handed them to him. Good luck, Elsa said goodbye and headed to Nabu's car that was to take her to the airport. They made it there without any adventures. Nabu helped Elsa to check in the tickets and drop off her luggage. When they announced the boarding to New York, Elsa noticed a tear rolling down Nabu's cheek. But the guy immediately brushed it away and pretended that he was not sad at all. Is everything all right? Elsa asked quietly as they stood in line. Yeah, thanks for being my friend, Nabu replied and poked her in the shoulder. I'll still be here. Yes, of course you will. Pulling a smile on his face, he said. They approached the stewardess who was checking tickets. This is the end of our journey. Goodbye, Elsa, Nabu said and left without waiting for her friend's reaction. Elsa walked to the plane through the aisle and kept thinking why. Why is Nabu the only person who didn't turn his back on her? Who helped her to the end? Elsa couldn't believe that their friendship had come to an end. But as she had suspected, it was obvious. Welcome to MSU, said the girl who accompanied Elsa to the dormitory. You'll be living with me and one other girl. You'll like it. We're very friendly and fun. Elsa was not eager to participate actively in student life. She didn't care about parties or assemblies. She only came here to study, and she was driven by revenge. They entered a spacious room. The walls were painted a basic beige color. They were decorated with 3 paintings and embroidery. But what Elsa liked most of all were the dream catchers above each bed. Oh, I think I forgot to introduce myself, laughed the attendant, Elsa's roommate, Chris. And I'm Elsa, she repeated, sitting down on the bed and marveling at the softness of the mattress. I didn't think that this place would be so comfortable. I usually imagined a dormitory with cockroaches and dirty floors. They can be said another neighbor, sitting on her bed and filing her nails. But not in our building. This place is really clean and orderly, so don't think you can bring guys here. I don't, Elsa said, embarrassed. Can you study here? Chris changed the subject to avoid an argument, pointing to a chair by the window. Actually, when we came here with Muse, this room looked terrible. But over the last 2 years, we've made it up in no time. So you're already in your 3rd year? Elsa guessed. Yes, I guessed, Muse replied grimly, continuing to file her nails. See that embroidery on the wall? Chris tapped her on the shoulder. That's my work. It didn't take long for Elsa to get used to the new place. Chris did turn out to be very friendly, just like she said she would be. But there was a problem with Muse. She didn't make contact. It seemed that she was disgusted by the mere sight of Elsa. Elsa did not understand the reasons for this dislike, but accepted the character of her neighbor. On the 1st of September, school began. Elsa did not fully understand the essence of the specialty hotel business, but she has always been attracted to the profession related to hotels and service personnel. In the future, she wanted to open a hotel herself. Every evening when tired Elsa returned from classes, she sat down at a desk, opened a textbook on financial literacy, and wrote everything she could. After 3 months of such labor, she figured out where to invest the money from the sale of the apartment. All these months she spent the minimum on food and personal hygiene products. She had about $1 million left, which had to be hidden somewhere. But Elsa decided not to mindlessly invest the money in a bank account. She went a smarter way, invested in currency. In the future, Under favorable circumstances, it was possible to get much more than it was in the beginning. And since Elsa didn't really need the money yet, she took the risk. "Where is Muse?" Elsa asked when Chris entered the room. It was 11 p.m., and Muse was still not home. "She's still at work," replied a tired Chris. "We have an internship right now." "Where do you work?" "In the Hotel Mirage on Novokosnetskaya. They take only from the 3rd year. But we didn't even find out, we just needed somewhere to get an internship. To be honest, Muse and I don't plan to work in hotels. My uncle made me, for example. By the way, this uncle took us on an internship. He owns the hotel. Can't your uncle hire you?" "And me unexpectedly?" Elsa was surprised. Chris raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Why you?" "But I need a job, and this would be a great option. Especially I, unlike you and Muse, want to work in hotels in the future." "Well, if that's what you want, I don't think my uncle would mind, but I'll have to ask. Let me go tomorrow and find out." "Wonderful, thank you." Elsa lay down on the bed and tried to sleep, but failed. The fragments of her mother's death and the image of that pendant reappeared in her memory. Her blood boiled with anger, but then she managed to pull herself together and shut down. "Elsa. Elsa." A familiar voice called out from the university. Elsa stopped and turned around. Chris was running towards her with some paper. The neighbor stopped, barely out of breath. My uncle, gave you permission to come for an interview." "Do you have to interview for a cleaning job?" Elsa joked. But of course Chris didn't get the joke. "A job is a job, but I'm sure you'll be hired. They are just short of staff. One show administrator quit because she was pregnant. By the way, get this, she got pregnant by a hotel employee, and they weren't even married." "I feel like my life won't be boring when I go to work at this hotel," Elsa said. "Oh, there will be so much gossip." "Thank you, Chris, I'll go there tonight." Elsa shuffled nervously from foot to foot before the interview. What was she afraid of, though? Who wouldn't pass the interview for the hall manager with 3 languages? Coming came a stern voice from behind the door. "Good afternoon, this is Elsa. Did you invite me for an interview?" She began uncertainly. "Well, why are you standing in the doorway? Come here. A hotel receptionist should not be shy about anything." Elsa smiled and sat down opposite Uncle Chris, whose name was Jan. She handed him her resume, her graduation papers, and her medical book. "So, let's see." Jan began to study the documents. After a few minutes he asked, "Do you know French?" "Yes, I've been learning it since I was a kid. I love this beautiful language," Elsa answered. Jan gave her a scrutinizing look. "Well, I will stop on your candidacy. It is better than all the others. Can you work from today? And what kind of shifts are there, night and day?" "Most students choose night shifts. Isn't it harder? You don't have many visitors. You can sleep until you're called." "I'll take you to the senior administrator now. I think you'll get along," Jan said. Elsa was taken to the lobby where she was met by a young, attractive guy. Matthew explained all the rules to the new employee as Ian had instructed him to do and left to go about his business. At first, Matthew seemed like an arrogant guy. But once Elsa heard his soft, melodious voice, the impression changed. He shyly beckoned her over to him. "Hi," he smiled, stammering slightly. "My name is Matthew, but you've already figured that out?" "Yes, my name is Elsa." "Nice to meet you," she answered awkwardly. "Shall I tell you how things work here? Let me give you a brief tour of our hotel." "First of all, look around," Matthew advised. Elsa followed his advice and looked around the lobby. It was quite large and combined 2 floors at once. The structure resembled a theater. There were balconies on the sides that went to the top, and on the first floor, a few meters from the entrance, there was a fountain. "How much did they pay?" she said out loud, not thinking anyone would hear her. "A lot. We're an expensive hotel." "A room here costs $25,000 a night," Matthew said. "It's still the cheapest." $25,000 for one night? Elsa got excited. "Quiet, don't shout like that. The first rule is that you can't yell at us. We always have to be polite and a little verbal. explained the guy. Do you understand? Yes, answered Elsa. They went to the second floor. This whole floor is occupied by restaurants. Here our guests hold meetings at breakfast or dinner. We have a stage over there. Matthew pointed to the far side of the room. So these balconies are for beauty? Oh, haven't you ever seen in the movies how important people go out on the balcony to discuss business? But these balconies, unlike in the movies, don't face the street, they face the lobby. I don't see anything wrong with that. The third and fourth floors were reserved for rooms, and the fifth floor had suites. The regular staff was not allowed to enter there. At the end of the tour, they returned to the front desk. So, is everything okay? Matthew joked. No, I quit. Goodbye. Elsa replied sarcastically. As they stood at the counter, there was no one else. Aren't you a student? Yes? Matthew asked. Yes, I'm studying hotel management. That's why I came to work here. I had to earn money somewhere anyway. Why not combine business with pleasure? Aren't you supposed to have school at 3? No, it's a shortened day. That's why I went to the interview. I didn't think I'd be hired right away. I'm planning on working nights. When will you study and sleep then? And that won't be a problem. I know how to allocate my time, assured Elsa. You can't even manage time management. Why don't you find an easier job? I didn't come here to listen to advice, but to work. Elsa got angry. A young girl approached them. She looked like a realtor who wanted to cheat Elsa out of her apartment. Good afternoon. How can I help you? Matthew said. What do you mean? What can I do for you? Are you a hotel or something? What can you do for me? Give me a room. Elsa looked at Matthew. He was not a very polite guest, but that's often the case with those who work in the service industry. What room are you interested in? Single? Elsa joined the conversation. Young lady, do I look like a married woman? What kind of stupid questions are you asking me? Where is your manager? Call him here. No, girl, please, let's deal without a manager. Elsa calmed her down. We just need to know your wish. My wish is that you call the manager, the visitor shouted. Elsa nodded to Matthew and he left to get Darian. What kind of rude people work here? The stranger was indignant while they were waiting for the manager. I'm sorry, we didn't mean to offend you, Elsa said. At that moment, Darian had already approached them. He was dressed in a strict black suit with a tie and looked as important as this lady. Elsa was sure that they would find a common language. Good afternoon. What happened? He asked. Good? I don't think this day can be called good. Your staff are terrible people. They treated me inappropriately, ruined my mood. What kind of attitude is that, Darian? We were not rude. It's all a blatant lie, Matthew said. The woman's eyes almost popped out of her head. She played resentment and anger perfectly. The guest is always right. Matthew Darian replied sternly. He approached the woman and asked her name. Jessica, the guest, replied resentfully. I am very happy to welcome you, Jessica, Darian said in a sweet voice and even bowed slightly. We are sorry that such a situation happened. We would like to express our deepest apologies and offer you one of the best rooms in our hotel. Jessica immediately broke into a smile. I guess that's what she wanted. We'll have our staff make the arrangements right away, Darian smiled. Yes, Matthew? Yes, Darian. Matthew gave Elsa a little push and began to organize the room. In a couple of minutes, everything was ready. Have a nice vacation. Darian wished his guest. As Jessica disappeared into the elevator, Matthew rebelled. Darian, why did you do that? Why didn't you believe us? Jessica is a very famous person. She's the one who forms opinions about hotels. Have you ever wondered why we're rated the way we are? That doesn't mean she can treat us like cattle. So Matthew, to her, you're inferior, as crude as that sounds. And it is my duty to punish you, Darian said. Punish you? For what? Elsa began to resent him. We have done literally nothing. I have no way to check it. You're both staying on night duty, scrubbing floors. What am I, a maid? Elsa was indignant. I was hired as a junior administrator. If necessary, you'll be a maid and cleaner and anything. Be thankful that I didn't fire you, Darian answered indifferently and left, not wanting to continue this unpleasant conversation. The hands of the clock were approaching 11 o'clock at night. Chris had already asked Elsa about her absence from the dormitory. Elsa had to answer honestly she was grounded. Elsa felt eerily uncomfortable sitting on the hard chair in the lobby. She didn't understand why she was being punished for nothing, like a schoolgirl. 15 minutes ago, Matthew had left to go to the store to get food. Silence reigned in the lobby. Only the murmuring of the fountain broke the silence. Elsa felt very ill. It must have been the lack of food in her stomach. She appeared to the circumstance that she had several millions in her account, and she was wasting her nights sitting on a horrible chair in a hotel. Not the kind of job she'd dreamed of, and Matthew was still gone. And because of the darkness, it was getting scary to be alone in such a large room. Elsa blinked a couple of times because she couldn't believe her eyes. "You're a Canadian citizen," she said, trying not to panic and pretending that everything was all right. "Yes, that's right," the man replied with an accent. He was good at impersonating a foreigner, but Elsa already understood everything. "Do you mind if I move the lamp a little closer to you to make sure it's you?" she asked. "Of course." Now Elsa was definitely sure that it was the man from the orientation. She quickly finalized everything and gave the number to the guest, who of course had changed his name. After a sleepless night, Elsa returned home to sleep it off. She didn't go to school that day. However, before she fell asleep, she called Chris to her and told her everything. "And he's at our hotel right now." "Oh, Chris." "Yes, and I need your help," Elsa whispered. "You're going on shift today, right? Here, he's staying in room 306. I want you to follow him personally and find out something. There's a reason he's staying at this hotel. I'm sure he's up to something." Chris listened to her friend very carefully and took her words seriously. The situation did look suspicious. Perhaps this man was a danger to the hotel guests and staff. She promised Elsa that she would follow him and try to find out as much information as possible without attracting too much attention. Safety was the top priority. But Elsa didn't wake up until late afternoon. It was 6 o'clock on the clock. She got up because of the terrible headache that had been plaguing her for the last hour. She drank some water, swallowed some painkillers. A few minutes later, Chris burst into the room. She was worried about something. "Chris, what's wrong?" Elsa asked, seeing her friend pacing back and forth. "I'm just trying to figure out the best way to present this to you," Chris said, walking over to Elsa and sitting down next to her on the bed. "Anyway, I found out what you asked. You were right, something is up. I pretended to be a cleaning lady and went into his room. And while I was dusting, I heard him talking on the phone. At first he was speaking in some foreign language. Of course I didn't understand anything, but then I heard the phrase 'tomorrow at 7 in the conference room,' this he said in English. I have no idea who he was talking to, but that's all I found out." "Thank you, Chris," Elsa nodded. "I'll go there tomorrow." The next day Elsa stood at the front desk and looked only in one direction the whole time, toward the conference room. "Where are you looking so intently? Did I miss something?" Matthew asked her. "What time is it?" Elsa asked nervously. 6:55. "Any minute now." "What?" "Any minute now. If you're talking about something dangerous, I'll be forced to alert management." "No, don't you dare," Elsa shouted. At that moment, people started coming out of the conference room. Tom was among them. Elsa looked hopefully at Matthew. "Cover for me," she asked, taking off her receptionist's uniform and putting on her maid's uniform. "What are you doing?" Matthew said indignantly. "I want revenge. If you're my friend, don't get in my way, but help me." "Explain it to me." "One thing at a time." "There's no time, I have to go." Elsa took the pre-prepared tea set and went to the hall.
Elsa's palms were sweating, but she walked, firmly realizing that this was her chance. The very moment when she could get her revenge. She didn't yet understand what she would do or how she would do it, but she knew for sure she would win. She entered the hall under the pretense of being asked to bring tea to the guests. The guards let her through.
When she entered the hall, she immediately analyzed the situation. In the very center of the round table sat Tom Mann. Some men in black suits were seated around him. Tom was saying something in bad French. Elsa couldn't make out the words, because he kept stuttering and sometimes talking nonsense. It was like the babbling of a 2-year-old child. He obviously didn't know French, it was obvious. At last Elsa could understand what they were discussing, or rather trying to discuss. It was about building a whole network of business centers in New York and Paris. All of Tom's colleagues were apparently French. You could read the bewilderment on their faces. When Tom confused words, he should have had an interpreter. But apparently there wasn't enough money for that. Elsa seized the opportunity and approached one of the Frenchmen with an offer of tea. As she leaned over to pour the tea for him, she smiled kindly and whispered quickly to him in French. Act as if I were just talking to you. This man, Tom, is not who he says he is. He's a crook. Don't make any deals with him. Elsa felt the other people in the room begin to squint at her. The Frenchman she was talking to took her advice and pretended that he hadn't heard anything, that they were just discussing tea. He smiled at Tom with the most genuine smile he was capable of. Elsa hurriedly removed herself from the hall. She had excellent hearing, and the walls were quite thin. Therefore, Elsa heard the voice of that Frenchman who said, I am very interested in your proposal. But before signing a contract with you, give me a few minutes to think it over. The Frenchman walked out of the hall and noticed Elsa signaling him from the right corner. They retreated to the staff room. It was there that Elsa decided to expose the fraudster. She took out her cell phone and began showing French various news publications. She took newspaper clippings out of her pockets and showed him a photo of her mother, who had passed away because of this madman. The Frenchman was horrified by what he saw, but there was no need to create panic. Tom might get suspicious and go into hiding. This could not be allowed to happen. He decided to go to the hotel manager. Elsa went with him to translate in case of emergency. Jan, oh my God, call the police. Elsa advised him. He'll soon get suspicious and run away. Then we'll never catch him. There's a man like that under the roof of my hotel. That would be such a blow to my reputation, John objected. All the more you should organize the capture of a criminal who destroys people's lives, said Elsa firmly. After a short thought, Jan listened to Elsa and called the police. In front of the astonished guests, the police officers handcuffed Tom and took him for questioning. The Frenchman almost kissed Elsa, trying to thank her. She saved him from such a terrible deal. Surely this crook was already up to something. The next day, when Elsa came to work, she saw a gorgeous bouquet of red roses on the table. Who is this joy to whom? She asked Matthew. It's from your French admirer, he answered. He is waiting for you in the main hall. Elsa held the bouquet to her nose and almost fainted from the fragrance. The flowers contained a note, Mademoiselle, waiting for you in the hall. It was written in French. Elsa immediately rushed to the hall to meet the Frenchman who had given her such a wonderful surprise. He was sitting on a blue sofa and looking at the floor. Are you waiting? Elsa said hello. He immediately jumped up, started kissing his savior, saying many compliments to her. They sat down on the sofa, and the Frenchman was finally able to introduce himself properly. My name is Bernard. I am so glad that fate gave me you as a rescue. I don't know how it would have turned out if you hadn't arrived in time. The collapse of our company, the disgrace of France, would have been a real horror. Elsa was indignant, laughing at his endless exclamations. Tell me, why do you know French so well? He admired. It is the first time I meet a young American woman who speaks our language as if it were her own. Thank you, Elsa replied with a smile. I've known French for a long time, and my mother taught it to me as a child, so I've been familiar with the language since I was in diapers. It was easy for me to learn. I'm really a native speaker now. After Elsa began to tell him the story of her family, about the tragic death of her mother, about how badly things turned out when they met this horrible man. I can't imagine what you're experiencing, the Frenchman admitted. But we finally managed to catch this fugitive. I'm sure he'll get a big sentence. He's cheated a lot of people. Yes, that's his only talent, replied Elsa grimly. I cannot know how you feel now, but I can guess how you will feel after my proposal, Bernard continued. Elsa perked up her ears. The beginning sounded interesting. Because of these circumstances, and with your knowledge of French, I would like to invite you to an internship in France. There I will pay for you to attend university in any specialty you wish. This is a great opportunity to move there and a chance to stay there forever. Tell me, would you like to visit Paris? Elsa's eyes lit up. Of course I would. How could you refuse something like that? I knew you'd say yes. You're a very clever girl. I rarely meet such good and conscientious people. You know, there's a reason I invited you to Paris. I asked the hotel manager to give me some information about you. He told me your last name and I understood. I know one of your relatives living in Paris, said Bernard. Come on, hesitated Elsa. This simply cannot be. All my relatives are in America. Although Elsa remembered about that old album and the stories of her mother. She had said that only her grandfather had survived the revolution. But what if he wasn't the only one who survived? Maybe there really were relatives left behind who ended up emigrating to France. Oh, I see you have a mini concilium here. John smiled at them. Allow me, Elsa, to express to you the deepest gratitude from the entire management of our hotel. You have saved our reputation. That's right, the Frenchman confirmed with a smile. Did you know, monsieur, that this mademoiselle has aristocratic roots? No way. It was Jan's turn to be amazed. Really, Elsa? Well, yes, she was embarrassed. If you are interested, here. Elsa opened the gallery on her phone and showed them both a picture of the medallion and some old group family photos. I reshot them from an album. How interesting. Ian shook his head. So what are you going to do now? I'm trying to persuade her to come to France, replied the Frenchman. Don't doubt it, he turned to Elsa again. I'm not just telling you all this now. I contacted your relatives as soon as I got some information. He worked as a designer, and now he's retired. I must introduce you. Go ahead, make up your mind. It's an opportunity. Elsa didn't hesitate for a second. There was nothing else holding her here. She had already said goodbye to her friends from her hometown, and in New York had not yet had time to find real friends. I agree, she said after a moment of silence, almost shouting, which frightened the Frenchman very much. He even clutched at his heart. You do not want to think about it. The flight's tomorrow. Can't you think of anything else? Bernard asked her. You don't want me to go, do you? Elsa grinned. You saved my business. How could I not want that? And your relative, he's already just waiting for you. You decided so quickly? I didn't think it would happen so easily. Bernard was surprised. I have nothing to look for or to wait for. I'm a free man. I'm not tied to places or people. Everyone who was dear to me has either said goodbye to me or is already in the other world, Elsa explained. In that case, I expect you tomorrow at John F. Kennedy Airport. Don't be late. Don't be late. Don't miss your chance. After 24 hours, Elsa enjoyed the view of narrow streets and walks on the cobblestone sidewalks of Paris. The aroma of coffee and croissants was in the air. She hadn't had breakfast yet, so she was drooling at literally every smell. The French really are real cooks. The cab driver decided to show her around the city without charging her extra. He even gave her a mini tour. This is the iconic Eiffel Tower. And this is the cafe from Emily in Paris. And this is the office building of that perfume. Elsa couldn't believe she was in this fairy tale, and only a day ago she was suffering from lack of sleep somewhere in cold New York. Here the sun was shining brightly, promising a wonderful day, many wonderful day. They pulled up to a 4-story white building. Its entrance was in a courtyard, so Elsa walked on her own. But she didn't have to think about where to go or what to say. At the gate stood an old man in plaid pants and a jacket with a boatee. Elsa intuitively realized that she needed to go to him. Good afternoon, Elsa, greeted her in French. I am glad that you finally came and honored me with your visit. Come in. They entered through the gate and then turned left, where there was a door to the so-called entrance. Except it wasn't an entryway at all. It turned out that all 4 floors belonged to a relative from France. She was stunned to hear that. I'm sorry, I still don't know your name, Elsa said as they entered the living room. I used to be called Roger, the old man answered in English. But here I decided to take a different name. For a long time now I've been Robert. It suits you very well, Elsa complimented him. Thank you, Robert smiled politely. He invited her to sit down on the sofa, and he began to pour tea. I'm so glad I found you. I didn't realize I had any relatives left in America. Just as I did not suspect of relatives in Paris, joked Elsa. I found out about you completely by accident. Yes, I see. Bernard told me everything. I'm sorry to startle you with such a question. But you plan to stay in Paris? Bernard has offered me an education here. I don't know what will happen, but I've accepted his offer. I don't know what the housing situation will be yet. Oh, there's no question about that. I have a very cozy apartment almost in the center of Paris, also left by my ancestors. Our ancestors are very special people, I can tell. In fact, they lost a lot after the revolution, moved here, started to build a new life, working part-time here and there. In my youth, I started out as an ordinary worker. But when I was 40, I changed my profession and became a designer. Yes, Bernard said you were a designer, a former designer. I don't have the energy to do it anymore. My grandson inherited my business and my brand. By the way, he's coming to visit me today from an important meeting. You wouldn't mind meeting him, would you? Of course not. I'd love to make new acquaintances. That's fine. Now I suggest you have breakfast, and I'm sure you're very tired on the road and haven't eaten yet. It's rare to get quality food on airplanes these days. I couldn't agree more, Elsa smiled. All day long, she and Robert talked about this and that. Elsa told him her story and how she was lucky to be here. Everything really did happen so suddenly. I was in Paris before I knew it, and only recently I was celebrating my 18th birthday. How quickly time flies, she said. The doorbell rang. Robert went to meet his grandson, and Elsa, meanwhile, quickly grabbed her mirror and put herself in order. There's my grandson, Robert exclaimed happily as he escorted the embarrassed boy into the living room. Good evening. It's a pleasure to meet such a lovely mademoiselle. Robert's grandson kissed Elsa's hand. I'm William. My grandfather told me a lot about you. Are you Elsa? Elsa nodded in agreement. She was a little stunned. No one had ever greeted her so gallantly before, but she would probably get used to it soon. The French love body contact. He was buzzing me about some American relative coming to visit him. I couldn't turn down the opportunity to see you, William went on. They got to talking. It turned out that William knew Russian very well. Grandfather always wanted his grandchildren to know their roots. You know, I've never been to America. I'd like to go there. They say it's fun there. There's something going on every day. Elsa laughed. Yes, that's true. The rumors don't lie. As they were talking, Robert came up to them and interrupted them. He was holding a cloth bag in his hands and crying. What's the matter with you? What's wrong? Do you need help? Elsa was concerned. No, Robert denied. I'm sorry. I let my feelings get the better of me. It's just that this pouch contains something that might worry you. Robert gently placed the pouch in Elsa's palm. She didn't open it right away, afraid of what she might see. She untied the black ribbon and slipped her hand into it. She fumbled for something glass or metal. Her curiosity couldn't wait any longer. She looked at what now lay in her hand. A gold pendant with a bright blue stone caused her a storm of emotion. She couldn't control her feelings and cried. It was the same pendant that turned out to be the key to all the events that had happened. It was all about that damn pendant. Where did you get it? She asked Robert, stammering. My good friend Bernard gave it to me and told me to be sure to give it to you. He was given the pendant. During the investigation, the crook kept it in his safe all this time. He didn't even sell it, though he was going to. It's about time they stopped him. It was the only thing of value our family had left. Everything was either burned or looted, and this pendant was lost. At least that's what I thought until now. I am very glad that it is now returning to you as it should. Thank you, Elsa whispered, and took this heart of the ocean, as her mother called it. From that moment on, Elsa's life took on new colors. She entered the University for International Relations, began to immerse herself in the culture of France, and her desire to see the world grew more and more. All this time, she communicated with William. He turned out to be a real gentleman, invited her on dates, gave her flowers. Her first kiss was at the Eiffel Tower. What else could a girl dream of? And soon they were married. Played a loud wedding, which seemed to know the whole of Paris. Elsa was flattered by such attention. She felt special and free. The bitterness of loss faded into the background. Now in her life in priority was her family life. Several years had passed since then. Elsa walked along the rain-wet asphalt, holding the hand of her 5-year-old son Pablo. They had arrived in Russia a few hours ago. William was walking next to her. They were wearing black raincoats and holding umbrellas in their hands. "Mom, what's this for? Why couldn't I stay home?" My son whined the whole way. "It's important for each of us, dear," Elsa explained to him. "In the future, you'll realize it." She took him in her arms. So they walked faster. Soon they reached the very grave 327. It was her cemetery number. The name Adela was visible on the headstone. Because of the dirt, some of the symbols on the headstone had become illegible. However, Elsa felt even in her heart that she was in the right place. Pablo and William stayed back, and Elsa walked right up to the grave. She laid flowers and said, "Hi, Mom. I thought I'd pay you a visit. It's been a long time since I've seen you. Don't think I've forgotten. I was just building a happy family." A light breeze blew on Elsa, which she took as a sign that her mother could hear her. "Mommy, I miss you so much." Elsa cried, bowing her head. "I miss your words, your support. You know I live in Paris now. Could you become a real chef there? I'm sure that in your new life it will be just like that." Elsa wiped her tears and took a small cloth bag out of her pocket. "Mommy, I brought you something." She took a pendant out of the bag and put it next to the flowers. "Look, Mom, I found it. It came back to us. Now you can rest easy. After me, it will go to my son, your grandson." "Dad, why is Mommy crying?" "Is she sick?" Pablo yelled at his father. "No, honey, she just decided to finally let go of her past," William answered him seriously. Elsa stood up, shook off the last drops of tears, and smiled warmly at her baby. "Your grandmother sleeps eternal sleep here, Pavlik. She would be very glad to see you." "She sees me," the son suddenly answered very seriously, "there in heaven." The parents smiled at the child's directness, took their son by the hands, and went to the exit of the cemetery. Past the tall, dark fir trees, past the old and new tombstones, through the still silence. Home to their present and future. For as long as she could remember, Megan had always dreamed of warmth, care, and attention. All this she lacked from early childhood. Megan's mom died of a heart attack when she was about 5 years old. The operation of the ward was forbidden to give birth at all due to health conditions. Doctors warned of the risks, but the woman still decided. The first years of her life, Megan was the most beloved child in the world. She vaguely remembered those times of warm hugs, mom's tender words, and kind smile. But of course, no matter how hard Megan tried, she couldn't remember the details. Mom's face was lost in a blur. And then Megan was left alone with her father, a somber and uncommunicative man. He faithfully fulfilled his parental duties. Fed his daughter, bought her clothes, even checked her homework, but any heart-to-heart talk was out of the question. Her father asked only specific questions about her grades at school, her health, her plans for vacations. Sometimes he wondered if anyone was hurting his daughter. Megan couldn't remember if Dad had always been so uncommunicative or if he had been so changed by the death of the woman he loved. Megan had heard from neighbors that her father loved her mother very much. He had long sought the favor of the modest beauty, and then, when Elena married him, fulfilled every wish of his wife. It was hard for Megan to imagine her perpetually dissatisfied father as romantic, loving, attentive. As she grew older, the girl understood. The father blames his daughter for the death of his spouse, accidentally overhearing his conversation with a neighbor. The men were standing in the stairwell, and Megan was just returning from school. The anniversary of her mother's passing was approaching. I guess that's why the neighbors, longtime friends, were having this conversation. I told her to get an abortion, Dad said quietly. But she wouldn't have it. Let it be, she said. She had a premonition that everything would end well. Megan, hearing these words, froze under the stairs. She just couldn't get up right now, thus giving away her presence. Well, it's all good in the end, and it was good at first, Uncle Peter, the neighbor, pointed out. Megan knew her mom was friends with his wife and Aunt Gray. Megan was born. Adeline still had a whole 5 years to live afterward. That's so sad, Dad agreed, but her health was failing, and I could see she was getting worse. And those sleepless nights, I myself tried to get up to my daughter to adult her to sleep, but I could not be there all the time. And those assholes, they finished her after 5 years. That's for sure. Even the doctor confirmed it. Megan was having a hard time processing what she had heard. She hadn't discussed it with anyone. And who would she tell? Her father, as it turned out, considered her the culprit of all his misfortunes, so he probably didn't talk to his daughter much. Megan didn't have any grandmothers, or rather she had one, her dad's mom, but she lived far away in the country. They saw each other very rarely, and of course, warm, trusting relations between them did not arise. And girlfriends. What about girlfriends? You can't talk to them about such topics. They won't understand. They're just fine. Each of them has a mom, a dad. Not all of them do, but Mom is the main mom. For so many tears, her childhood teenage years were spilled into a pillow. Longing for a mother the girl hardly knew or remembered. Sadness over the cool and strained relationship with her father. Megan dreamed of growing up sooner, having a family of her own, having children. She had no doubt that sooner or later a man would appear in her life who would love and protect her. And Megan would be happiness for him, a source of energy and inspiration. The father probably still loved his daughter in his own way. He rooted, loved, cared for his daughter as best he could, worried about her future. It was her father who arranged for the girl to go to the University of Economics and Law, and even to the prestigious Faculty of Finance and Economics, connected some connections. And now his daughter, who would hardly have been admitted on general grounds, is a student of the best university in the city. No, Megan was not stupid or lazy. She had always done well in school, and she had always done her homework diligently. But it was just that to enter this faculty required a very outstanding ability. The girl didn't have them, so her father helped her. True, among the girl's classmates, as it soon turned out, outstanding abilities possessed few. So many then got into the university this way, either for money or by blat. Megan liked studying, and somehow warm, friendly relations with her classmates were formed at once. A wonderful student time began. Life had changed a lot. Megan felt that very soon she would become an adult and independent, which means that her dream of a loving family is very close. In the 4th year, fate dealt the girl another crushing blow. She was left all alone. Her father is frowning and not talking, but so reliable. In the shop where he worked, a milling machine operator, a gas cylinder failed, and a fire broke out. There were few casualties, but Megan's father was among them. Then left alone in the whole world, Megan realized that all this time felt the support and love of a loved one. Yes, her father had been that kind of man, unable to express his feelings, not saying much. But now Megan realized it, how much he did for her. About a year, the girl came to herself, got used to the new world without her father, and then John appeared in her life. John was a student at their school, but he was in a different department, law school. He, like Megan, was graduating that year. They met at a lecture in the auditorium, which was common for soon-to-be graduates. Young people were told about the very procedure of graduation, state exams and diploma, introduced young people to possible employers, presented companies that offered jobs to the best and most diligent students. It was interesting. Megan happened to be among strangers. Her friends were sitting at the other end of the hall, but Megan was a little late and there was no seat next to them. So she had to sit where there were still empty chairs. At first, all the girls' attention was focused on the stage. She caught every word of the speakers, even wrote something down. "Bye, bird." An unexpected question took the girl by surprise. She turned around and looked at the speaker. A handsome guy was looking at her with a smile. A wide smile, white teeth, correct facial features, and bright blue eyes. They immediately charmed Megan. There was so much interest in them. The girl suddenly felt that she cared about this man. "It's so depressing," he repeated, "and the weather outside is so beautiful. Spring is in full swing. There's a spring flower festival in the park. Why don't we run away?" It was the first time Megan had ever seen this guy. Besides, the lecture was very important and interesting, and after it, Megan and her friends agreed to go to the library to prepare together for the credit on economic theory. But all this somehow suddenly lost importance, and the girl nodded her head in agreement. The boy glowed, as if her answer made him the happiest man in the world. He confidently took Megan's hand and led her away from the classroom. Some people looked at the couple, but Megan didn't care at all. The weather did turn out to be wonderful. The sun was shining brightly from the clear sky, which was softly blue, and the freshness and purity of the greenery had just blossomed. The air was filled with the aromas of plants beginning to bloom. On the way, the young people got acquainted. It turned out that the guy's name was John. He admitted that as soon as he saw Megan, he couldn't take his eyes off her. "You're just incredibly beautiful," he said, looking at the girl. And she, strangely enough, did not feel a shadow of doubt, although always distinguished by modesty, and even stiff. I looked at you for a long time. I dared to talk to you because I was afraid you'd send me away. And when you agreed to go away with me, it was a weight off my shoulders." Megan was pleased to hear those words. She liked John more and more. What if a girl forbade herself to even dream of such a thing, so as not to be disappointed? What if he was the man she would later start a family with? Yes, these thoughts visited Megan at the first acquaintance. They started dating. John turned out to be a reliable, loving, sensitive man. Having learned the girl's story, it was as if he took her under his wing. He tried to help Megan with everything. The guy even helped her renovate her house. And more precisely, he did it himself, almost alone because the girl did not understand anything about it at all. A little more time passed. The young people graduated from university and both got a job. Megan became an accountant in a small firm for the installation of intercoms. John went as an assistant judge at the local courthouse. Megan knew by then that John was growing up without a father. His mother had given birth to him at a rather late age, as they say, for herself. She was a powerful woman who had spent her entire life in a senior position at the airport. Even now, at her advanced age, she didn't want to leave her position. John kept trying to introduce Megan to her, but for some reason, the girl was afraid of what if John's mother didn't like her. What then if this woman will be against the relationship of the only son with a girl of the lower strata of society? John laughed at these fears. Mom wasn't like that. Yes, she is used to command, but in everything that concerns me, she gives me freedom and autonomy. I've been on my own for 6 years. She's always worked hard, and I've been at home looking after the household. So don't worry, I'm not a mama's boy, and she's not a monster. Still, Megan persisted in making up excuses not to go visit John's mother. Worried, anxious, dreading the meeting. And then John proposed to Megan. It cannot be said that it was quite unexpected. Relationships of young people have long been strong. Both of them could not imagine life without each other. The girl had no doubt that John was the man she had dreamed of since childhood. He gave her everything that Megan lacked: love, attention, care, tenderness, or she could talk to him about anything. A soulmate. Sometimes Megan couldn't believe her luck. It might not have happened if she hadn't been in the chair next to John at the lecture that day. It was just such an accident of fate. John did everything beautifully, just like in the movies. He invited Megan to a restaurant to celebrate his small promotion. The girl had no idea of the true motives behind the date. Then suddenly musicians came up to them and played a beautiful melody. Megan, flapping her eyes in surprise, looked at the men in white tails. Then a waiter appeared with a gorgeous bouquet of roses. John took it from the hands of the young man and with a smile presented it to Megan, then deftly pulled out of his pocket a velvet box. "Be my wife." John smiled, looking into Megan's eyes. "You are the most beautiful girl in the world. I love you and I want to be with you always." The girl then even had tears flowing from her eyes, so much she was touched. This proposal, it was made so beautifully. John had carefully prepared for the meeting, so much thought. What was happening resembled a scene from a good, though not too original melodrama. The young people began to prepare for the wedding. Both decided that they did not need a lavish celebration, just a party with friends from the university and a restaurant. And yet it was necessary to solve a lot of issues, to book a place in the registry office, to find a restaurant, to think over the menu. And, of course, now Megan had to meet John's mom. There was no point in delaying the meeting any longer. Megan remembered the day she'd first seen Martha. She'd been terribly nervous, but the woman who'd opened the door had seemed to be smiling at her genuinely. Tall, slender Martha looked very stylish in her elegant dress, with her hair slicked back smoothly. A real lady, and she behaved in a very friendly and polite manner. Megan realized at once that John's mother belonged to the so-called cold type of women. Careerist, used to work hard, compete, and achieve their goals. John is the same. He does not wait for heart-to-heart talks, warm embraces. No worldly advice. Martha's not going to be a second mom. And in the role of caring grandmother who spoils grandchildren with pies, it is also difficult to imagine her, but it's all nonsense. Martha caused Megan respect and even admiration. You bet, because she has achieved so much on her own and became a boss and a wonderful son raised. All this alone, without the help of her husband or relatives. After the wedding, began to live in Megan's apartment. Both worked. John received a good salary, enough even for some excesses, cafes and restaurants, beautiful clothes, concerts, and most importantly, to travel. For 2 years of marriage, Young managed to go to the sea 5 times. Not to luxury resorts with 5-star hotels, but still it was a wonderful vacation. Cheerful, carefree, full of sunshine and warmth, Megan and John together learned to lead a household. In principle, the young wife knew how to do everything. She had been living alone for a long time, but the head of the family had to learn new skills. Although John coped with it quickly and even as if playfully, Megan felt happier than ever. Next to her was a man who understood her half a word. John listened with interest to Megan's news, accumulated during the day, in all situations took her side, and he often hugged his young wife on and off. Megan realized that she had finally met the man she had long dreamed of and mentally thanked fate for this chance encounter. "I wish our Stephen would turn out to be so smart and responsible," what the young father dreamed, rocking his tiny son in his arms. Megan nodded her head. She had slightly different plans for this child. The young mother wanted Stephen to be happy and healthy, and the rest was not so important. You didn't have to be a factory manager at all to feel joyful and peaceful. Stephen did turn out to be an incredibly curious little boy. He was ahead of his peers in many ways. Early began to walk, early spoke. The baby constantly asked his parents questions, was interested in the world around him, trying to understand literally everything. The newly baptized parents did not want the soul in the firstborn. And when he was about 4 years old, John and Megan decided that it was time to give birth to Stephen's little sister. Megan hoped that she and John would have a daughter. She wanted to give this little girl everything she didn't have herself. Pretty dresses, smart hairstyles at the matinee, talking about girly topics, doing things together in the kitchen and all that. But Richard was born, a wonderful blue-eyed baby boy, charming, charismatic, attracting the attention of others. So what's for the daughter next time? John smiled, rocking the stroller. It was their first family outing of the city. Stephen was holding on to the handle of the stroller too. He was so looking forward to his brother, so excited to see him. True, when Richard was brought home from the hospital, he was a little disappointed. It turned out that Stephen had hoped that his brother would be older right away. He imagined a boy with whom he could play catch-up or hide and seek. Time flew by at breakneck speed. It turned out that coping with a couple of little boys at once is not so easy. And then, unexpectedly, Martha came to Megan's rescue. Every day after work, her mother-in-law would rush home, quickly change her clothes, have dinner, and then go straight to her daughter-in-law's house. John was often late in court, sometimes coming in late at night. Megan was exhausted by evening, and it was during this difficult period that Martha appeared. To take care of the grandchildren, she would go out with the little ones to walk in the yard. Sometimes they went further into the park. It was only 2, well, at most 3 hours a day, but how Megan looked forward to them each time. While the kids were away, she had time to clean up, cook something, go to the bathroom, and all in peace and quiet. It seemed like a small thing, but for a young, tired mother, it was a real salvation. How grateful Megan was to Martha. She repeatedly told her mother-in-law about it, and the latter smiled and replied that she herself was happy to communicate with her grandchildren. No, a warm and close relationship between daughter-in-law and mother-in-law had not developed, although Megan wanted it very much. She invited her mother-in-law to tea, tried to start frank conversations, but this woman, she was some too aloof, cold and inaccessible like the Snow Queen. It was either her personality or she didn't like Megan very much. Eventually, Megan stopped worrying about it and accepted the situation as it was. Martha stayed away from her daughter-in-law with advice, reproaches, and moralizing. She showed up when Megan needed her and helped the young mother a lot. Perhaps the woman herself did not even realize how she supported Megan in a difficult period. A little more time passed, the boys grew up. Now both went to the garden, and Megan was finally able to go to work. There was more money in the family. The couple began planning a summer trip to the sea. It was to be their children's first. And then life in the country began to change. Enterprises were closing one after another. That fate befell the firm where Megan worked. The woman was out of work. John's salary began to be delayed steadily, which, by the way, at the new price level was not enough even for the most basic necessities. John was now practically never home at all. After a working day in court, he ran around the city looking for a part-time job. Somewhere to guard a warehouse, somewhere to help unload a truck. The man grabbed every opportunity to bring home an extra. Megan was a housewife now. She was looking for a job in her specialty. She ran to interviews, advertised in newspapers, but there was no result. In the end, the woman couldn't even get a job as a salesman. There was no demand for jobs in their town at that time. Megan was glad that she was able to at least find a job as a cleaner. Now she scrubbed the floors in the entryways of a neighboring house in the early morning while everyone was still asleep. It didn't pay much, but there was a plus side to the job. It ended late in the morning. The whole day was free. Money was scarce. The children were growing at a dizzying rate, and clothes were quickly becoming too small for them. They also needed nutritious meals. This John and Megan could sit on buckwheat or pasta, and the boys need vitamins, meat, fruit, milk. Young spouses were often close to despair. It was Martha who kept them from being completely lost. She was cut down long ago, as she should have been on a well-deserved vacation by age. And just someone needed a warm place, which for a long time was occupied by a firm and principled boss. But Martha managed to save a certain amount of money during the years of work at a fairly high post. She dreamed of buying a small house by the sea where she expected to meet her old age. But circumstances have changed and prices have risen. Now the woman's savings would not be enough for a decent home, and she was not going to buy anything. So Martha used her savings to sponsor the young family every month. Both John and Megan knew if anything happened, they wouldn't be lost. Martha wouldn't let them go under. But at the same time, they both didn't want to abuse the woman's help, so they did their best. It was hard, and yet the feeling of a strong rear end kept them from being discouraged. In spite of everything that was happening, Martha was still unknown to Megan. Her mother-in-law kept her distance from her daughter-in-law, and she didn't hug her son either. But grandchildren are a different matter. Sitting next to them, the woman blossomed. She embraced them without shyness, kissed them, called them affectionate nicknames, and the boys reciprocated. Megan sometimes tried to talk to her husband about it. "Don't worry about it. Mom was always like that." He smiled. "Just a person like that. Kind, good, loving. But she does not know how to show her feelings. Maybe it's because Mom grew up in an orphanage. She didn't get love when she was a kid. So she doesn't know how to express her feelings. But she's reliable and she doesn't abandon her own." When John and Megan's sons went to school, Martha took over the lessons. It turned out that she once, many years ago, wanted to become an elementary school teacher. Then the woman's career took a different path. But now the long-time dream was realized in her grandchildren. Grandmother was inspired by the boys. She knew how to be strict and demanding, but at the same time she emphasized to interest Stephen and Richard. to instill in them a thirst for knowledge to develop the innate abilities of her grandchildren. While parents tried to get an extra penny and disappeared on earnings, their children did not run homeless in the yard. They were under the reliable supervision of their grandmother, who invested a lot in their development. Stephen and Richard were the best students in their classes. They were also good at sports, because Martha had time to take them to the volleyball section located on the other side of the city. In this sports center, the best coach worked, and Martha did not agree to anything less for her grandchildren. And so they lived, stretched, supported each other, raised their children. And then one day, John got tired of working, as the man himself put it, miserable existence. He decided to risk opening his own business. It is clear that the man took the money for the promotion of the business from his mother. And where else? Not by taking out loans from the bank at crazy interest rates. Then the newlyweds had their first son, Stephen. The name was chosen by John, the name of his neighbor, who paid a lot of attention to the boy and became for him a kind of a substitute for his grandfather. He was a respected man, serious, intelligent. He headed a whole local factory for a long time. John bought some technical stuff from a warehouse in a neighboring town, sold it on the market at a higher price, and immediately made a profit, albeit a small one. The success inspired John, so he decided to work in this direction and registered as a sole proprietorship. Megan helped him with the documents. She was an economist, worked as an accountant for a long time, so reporting and primary documentation were completely on her. The couple rented a place in the market and began work. At first, the business was slow. The client base had not yet been built up. Links with suppliers had not been established. Profits in the first few months were either minimal or non-existent. I had to solve many different problems. Sometimes I even wanted to give up, but in the end, the business went on, and the small store earned money. Finally, the family had money, albeit small, but their own. They didn't have to ask Martha for help anymore. John even managed to pay her back the money he had borrowed for the business. Megan knew that her mother-in-law tried to refuse to give this help as a gift to the young family. But John insisted they flew to the sea after all. The boys were already old enough. Megan watched with what joy they were running along the beach, and her heart sank with delight. What happiness this was. More on that next. John's business grew. Soon the man opened an entire store, then another. Now he had a whole staff working for him, accountants, managers, salespeople. But Megan was given the opportunity not to work and to deal with the house and children. True, the boys had already become teenagers and no longer needed a nanny. But the family moved to a private house, and Megan had a whole garden at her disposal. For its improvement, the woman took up with energy and inspiration. And again she thanked fate for what is happening in her life. The house is a full cup, a loving husband, wonderful, talented children. Every day a reason for joy and pride. And a garden in which Megan felt like a full mistress. Here she felt calm, relaxed, peaceful. The woman believed that her present life was a reward for what she had experienced as a child. She also often regretted that her father did not see how wonderful life was for his daughter. He probably would have been happy for Megan, and he certainly would have cherished his grandchildren. And yet, as time went on, Megan began to realize that something was missing. John had grown distant. No, they still had a wonderful relationship. Her husband was never rude to her, always remembered holidays and their personal dates. Only he was too busy working. He came home late at night, often flew on business trips, literally lived his life. Stephen and Richard are almost adults now. They have their own lives, their own friends, their own interests, and that's fine. It was just a little sad that their sons had grown up so quickly and Megan hadn't had time to fully enjoy their childhood years, too busy trying to survive. Martha remained alien and cold. Such a temperament. Megan probably didn't even know until now how or what to talk to her about. Their only topic of conversation was probably Richard and Stephen. Her mother-in-law had grown old, but she still looked like an iron lady. She lived separately, and she refused to move out of her own apartment, where she was the full mistress, into her son's house. And Megan understood and supported her in this. And in this difficult period in Megan's life, again knocked happiness. She didn't even believe her feelings at first. She thought she just didn't even seem to allow the thought to be true. But then it became all too obvious. Megan realized she was expecting a baby again after all these years. John seemed overjoyed, but still took the news a little too reservedly. There wasn't the excitement in his eyes that there had been years ago when he had learned of his wife's first and second pregnancies. "Wow, so unexpected," he smiled, then pulled Megan close and kissed her. "We need to find you the best doctors. We're getting older, you know." Megan understood and was worried too, of course. Being pregnant in your early 20s was very different from being pregnant with a woman in her 40s. There are definitely more risks. The Suns took the news of the imminent arrival of a brother or sister positively. "Wow, we're going to have a little one." Stephen smiled. "It's so weird, but I like the news." "It's fun," Richard shook his head. Martha, hearing the news, only shrugged her shoulders. "Well, it's unexpected, of course, but it's nothing special. I had John when I was a little younger than you. Everything's going to be all right now." The pregnancy, despite Megan's misgivings, went easily, but as an older woman, she had to undergo more frequent checkups. At the next ultrasound, Megan lay on the cold couch and prayed to herself that the baby would be okay. She, of course, dreamed of a daughter and a long time ago, since childhood. After the birth of her 2 sons, the wish had been forgotten. And now, when she found out that she was pregnant again, Megan began to hope again, how she wanted to become a mom of a charming girl. The woman chased these thoughts away from herself, convinced that one should be happy with any child. And it was unlikely that after 2 boys, suddenly such a miracle would happen. Why would it be a girl? Now, lying on the couch, Megan wanted only one thing, that with this child that lives under her heart, everything turned out to be all right. Whether it's a boy or a girl is a matter of 10. Being pregnant with her first sons, Megan didn't know much. Now she had a wealth of information that made her heart clench anxiously and her eyes gaze into the face of the doctor, inserting a sensor across her abdomen to read her emotions. Storina kept thinking the doctor was frowning. How scared she was. Was it really that bad in there? "Do you have a girl?" Suddenly the man in the white coat said in a calm, mundane tone. A hot wave of joy flooded Megan's heart. She even felt a little dizzy. She hadn't expected to be told the gender so early. And then there was a girl. Was this really happening to her? Had her dream come true after all these years? Is she all right? Megan asked Megan the question she wanted to know. "She's fine. No abnormalities." Vivian was born on her due date. Megan had thought of a name for her daughter a long time ago. Back in college, I think. The girl was born a healthy baby and soon became the family's favorite. Martha now came to Megan's house every day to babysit her granddaughter. Once again, her help came in handy. Megan adored her daughter because she had waited so long for her. She had stopped dreaming of such a gift, but sometimes she needed time to take a bath or go shopping alone. And then Martha came to the rescue again. Her time flew by at breakneck speed. Megan knew it was always like that when you have a small child. He's just a helpless little baby. Before you know it, it's already a person with its own personality and hobbies. Vivian turned out to be a pretty little girl. She took after Megan, was the same swarthy, slender, and graceful, but her eyes were her father's, huge, bright blue. They shone on her swarthy, beautiful face. The boys had all grown up. Stephen graduated first. He easily got into the Boston Medical Academy. Stephen must have decided in the 5th grade that he was going to be a doctor. At first, his parents thought it was a frivolous hobby. But as time went on, the eldest son stayed true to his dream. In the end, he entered the medical school, and on the budget. Megan at first was afraid to let the young guy alone in the big city. But Stephen, he was serious enough and independent for such a university. So in the end, his mother had to respectfully accept his decision. A few years later, Richard followed his brother. He, too, entered Boston University, only he chose a different specialty. From childhood, he was attracted to computers, programs, technical puzzles. The sons flew out of the nest. The husband lived a life of work. During this period, Megan realized what a happiness it is that she has a daughter small, beautiful, loved, and loving. She filled women's lives with joy and happiness, made it bright and meaningful. If it weren't for Vivian, Megan would feel all alone and unneeded now. Vivian practiced ballet and the girl was doing great. The choreographers were all saying she had real talent. Megan knew that her daughter went in her. Except that in childhood, Megan did not have such an opportunity to show her gift. Her father, of course, did not take her daughter to a club, but Vivian had succeeded. The girl even traveled with performances in different cities. A real tour, loving, caring mother everywhere accompanied her. It was a bright and saturated life which gave Megan a daughter. Everything was good, just wonderful. The boys studied and worked in Boston. Megan visited them occasionally. The sons were happy, and that made them happy. John was developing a business that was bringing in more and more profit. Now Karina had a daughter, whose long-standing dream was finally realized. It would seem, live and rejoice. But the woman's heart was increasingly clenched from some vague premonitions. Something was wrong. Megan chased away bad thoughts. She was even going to see a psychologist, but one day, the cause of the vague anxiety revealed itself. Megan had gone to the mall to find a dress for her daughter's next performance. Vivian had caught a cold somewhere in the garden, so Martha stayed with her. Megan went to the mall. The woman was in high spirits. She had managed to find a wonderful outfit for her daughter, and it was just the right size. She imagined how excited her little girl's eyes would be when she saw the outfit. That's when the woman noticed John. She just happened to glance down, going up the escalator, and saw her husband on the first floor in a bright orange shirt, which she herself had given him. It was a stylish shirt with short sleeves, summer, dressy, and elegant at the same time. John liked it immediately, and now he often wore it to work. John wasn't walking alone, but with a young girl in his arms. From afar, Megan couldn't see all the details, couldn't see the stranger's face, didn't have time to estimate her age. But she noticed the main thing. John's hand was resting on the thin waist of the young woman. She, in turn, had her palm in the back pocket of John's pants. John was smiling happily. The world turned upside down in just a few moments. Megan stood on the escalator steps. She considered herself a happy, accomplished woman who had managed to build a strong family. And on the next floor, she arrived already a cheated and betrayed spouse. To gather her thoughts, Megan went up to the food court, settled down at a small table in the far corner of the hall, and ordered herself a coffee. What she had just witnessed, how to explain it? Megan really wanted to find some excuse for what she had seen, but it wasn't working. If she wanted to, she could still convince herself that John was just walking through the mall with a female employee. Maybe they wanted to look at the assortment of competitors or something else. John had his arm around the stranger's waist. Both of them were not embarrassed by the people, who at this time in the mall were plenty. They walked with their arms around each other and smiled as if they were well-off free students. And between them there was clearly a special relationship. It was immediately apparent. Is John cheating on her? It's hard to believe. Almost impossible. But why impossible? Megan began to reflect on her life and realized that she and John had long lived as close relatives, but not as loving spouses. All their conversations revolved around their children and their future. When was the last time they had gone out together? Besides, John was away at work too often, flying on business trips. Maybe it wasn't business trips at all, but traveling with young mistresses. Megan found it hard to breathe, as if she'd been hit in the solar plexus. She couldn't get enough air. Everything was spinning in front of her eyes. Was her happy married life just an illusion? How stupid did she have to be not to see it? Megan decided not to get too excited. She pulled herself together and got up from the table. She'd have to go home and act like nothing had happened. When John returned, she would discreetly take his cell phone and look into his correspondence. Then everything will be clear, and we can do something about it. You need proof. Otherwise, you can fantasize a lot of things. Maybe it's not so bad after all. That night, Megan put her plan into action. She'd always trusted her husband. It had never occurred to her to go through his phone before, and John knew it because his cell phone didn't even have a password. The man had left the phone on the coffee table when he went to the bathroom. He generally assumed that his spouse was already asleep. Megan was awake. As soon as the sound of water came from the bathroom, she slipped out of bed and went downstairs. She grabbed her husband's cell phone, entered his messages, and there was a lot of interesting things. Megan learned that her husband's lover's name was Catherine. She was only 25 years old, not much older than Stephen. Deceived spouse, leafed through numerous photos of a young girl. On them, she showed the advantages of her luxurious figure. Young, incredibly beautiful, daring Catherine was not shy and wrote such things, which rather even think was embarrassing, but John clearly liked it. Apparently, the couple had already had quite a long affair. John was firmly on the hook for the young beauty. They called each other cute nicknames, made plans for a summer vacation. Apparently, the lovers had not the first time traveled together to the sea. It hurt to read this correspondence, but she needed to know what was going on. What she saw shocked her. She did not want to believe that all this was true. The correspondence was also about Megan. Catherine called her lover's wife an old lady. John did not even try to defend his wife. On the contrary, sent in response smiling smiley faces saying it's funny to him. How could this happen to them? They were once the closest and dearest people to each other, two halves of one whole. They had overcome so much together, and suddenly this happened. The sound of the water in the bathroom faded, and Megan hurriedly returned the phone to its place and rushed into the kitchen. Let John think she'd gotten a drink of water. For now, she didn't want to show her husband that she was aware of this ugly affair on the side. She didn't want to, or she just couldn't. She needed to digest the news, figure out how to proceed, realize after all what she really wants, and get used to the idea that John is not a reliable wall, behind which so cozy to hide from the hardships of life and the usual traitor. Outwardly, nothing has changed in the life of the family, but now Megan became more attentive. John's delays at work and his constant business trips were perceived quite differently from time to time. While John was in the bathroom or out without his phone at the neighbors, Megan would look at his phone. Catherine texted John often. Some of the messages were quite explicit. They were usually accompanied by pictures of the girl. To give Catherine credit, she looked great. Judging by the state of her body, the girl spent long hours in the gym. From the correspondence, Megan realized that Catherine does not work and does not study. A typical kept woman. John was apparently willing to pay for it all. No, Megan knew that men just over 40 often pay attention to young nymphs. They probably feel younger, more energetic, stronger than their peers. And what is there to hide? 25-year-old friends are generally much more attractive than 40-year-olds, but the woman thought that her family would not be affected by this. She remembered the way John had looked at her, what he had said to her. He had genuinely loved Megan. Once upon a time, she had never doubted that. Could such feelings also grow cold with time? Catherine was no longer just a lover or a girl for occasional entertainment, who could be dumped at any time, swapped for another. John and his young lady's relationship was about 5 years old. Sometimes historical dates were glimpsed in their correspondence, and the oldest ones were around the time Vivian was born. Apparently, that was when they had met. Megan remembered that period of time after giving birth and with a newborn baby in her arms. She didn't feel very well. She probably looked even worse. Megan was completely focused on her health. She didn't even have the energy for her sons at the time. Thankfully, by the time they were born, her sisters had long since managed to become fully independent young men. Of course, Megan paid almost no attention to her husband because, as it seemed to her, there was no need. A grown man passionate about his work. But maybe that was where the mistake lay. Maybe she herself was to blame for what was happening to their family now. Megan shook her head and chased away the wrong thoughts. What was her fault? It was John, after all, who had decided to look for fun on the side. No would have supported his wife in her time of need, to take on some of the responsibilities, to take care of his spouse and newly born and daughter. No, John chose another option. Catherine may not be his first mistress. John had been estranged for a long time, after all. Megan realized that clearly now. It's just that the woman preferred not to notice such trifles as distant alarm bells. He earns money, does everything for the family, does not drink, does not beat, does not humiliate. In money does not limit. Well and wonderful. What else is there to complain about? Megan wasn't complaining. She lived and enjoyed a happy, as it seemed to her, family life. And then suddenly it hit her. Maybe Catherine was not John's first mistress, but that it was with her he had a serious enough relationship, Megan did not doubt. John was truly in love with the girl. It could be felt in the tone of his messages. What only affectionate words he did not call his mistress. The man protected his lady from domestic, financial, and any other problems, gave her gifts, was constantly interested in her desire. It pained Megan to read this. Perhaps he had never behaved like that with her, even in the golden years of their marriage. It was understandable then. They were spinning, surviving, pulling children not to sentimentality. Megan realized that Catherine was getting on John's nerves about the divorce. Well, and when you already divorced your old lady, wrote the girl, supplying the message with red from anger emoticons. All in due time, baby. Answered John. I'd like more details. I'm in the process. A lot of things need to be prepared so that we can live not only happily but also richly. My princess loves a beautiful life. John's usually reserved and serious demeanor made Megan almost nauseous, but she continued to read the messages, looking for information about the upcoming divorce. She was more interested in this issue than any other, because it directly affected her and the children. Megan wasn't particularly worried about how her sons would take the divorce. They were adults and both of them had been living on their own for a long time. For them, most likely little will change. But the daughter, she is accustomed to this house and adores her father. Despite his indifference, the little girl would be very worried. Megan had no doubt about that, and something would have to be done about it. John's messages sometimes slipped in that he was taking his time with the divorce to properly prepare for leaving. What would that mean? The spouse was clearly up to something, and Megan wanted to find out what it was about. As far as her relationship with her spouse was concerned, nothing much had changed since Megan had found out about Catherine. Faking ignorance was easy. Megan and John hadn't spoken in a long time. Hey, how are you? How are the kids? That's all they talked about. And that's the life they've had for a long time. How come Megan didn't realize this before? I guess she was too busy with her daughter and her own worries and plans. She didn't tell Martha the details of her son's life, of course. She still came over sometimes to play with her granddaughter. There were times that Megan took Vivian to her grandmother to go on business. But the relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law never became warm and frank. Over the years, Megan had trusted Martha completely in everything about the baby. Perhaps it was the only person with whom the woman could leave her daughter with a light heart. But otherwise, over the years, Martha and Megan had remained largely strangers to each other. No, of course, Megan couldn't tell Martha about John, though she wanted to share it with someone. Why worry the older woman? Of course, she'd be upset to hear about her son's behavior. Will be worried it will negatively affect her health. Of course, the mother-in-law will still find out about the divorce, which of course she will. Even if John did not plan this procedure, Megan herself would have organized it, because cannot live with a traitor. That's how she perceived her husband now. If you're in love with someone else, say so. Why lie, why hide, why scheme? John never once scolded Catherine when she insulted Megan in her messages. And the old woman had called her both fat and stupid. John had at best ignored those unflattering remarks, at worst responded with laughing emoticons. It was hurtful. But Megan was much more interested in her husband's vague promises to divorce her as soon as everything was financially settled. The spouse was preparing something, some kind of scam, the results of which Megan was to be left with nothing. The man didn't write about it directly. It is understandable correspondence with his mistress had a completely different character, was light, humorous, in some places hot. But from some of the words and hints, Megan knew John was up to something. But how would she know what surprise to expect? Surely John and his mistress would discuss the details of the plan when they met. Megan, understandably, felt the whole situation hard. The pain of betrayal of a loved one, a vague future suspended state, all this frightened her, and there was no one to share it with. Had her mother been alive, how much easier would this trouble have been to bear? Megan slept badly, became nervous, pale and thin, irritable and withdrawn. Her physical condition even worsened, with headaches. One morning, as Megan was feeding her daughter breakfast, her mother-in-law called. "Are you home now?" Martha asked. "Yes," Megan answered. "John's at work, but my daughter and I are home." "Great, I'll be right there." Megan was overjoyed. "That's great. That means the mother-in-law can take care of her granddaughter. Meanwhile, she's going to go to the doctor. She's been having a lot of headaches. Have them prescribe some pills. I can't stand it anymore." Martha showed up as usual with a present for her granddaughter. A beautiful doll in a big pink box. The girl threw herself on her grandmother's neck. No, not because of the toy, of course, but there was just a special bond between Martha and Vivian. The grandmother and granddaughter seemed to understand each other without words. Megan had seen something like that before with her sons. Martha was a wonderful grandmother to all her children, sensitive, caring, attentive. It was surprising, considering her bossy, somewhat cold nature. Surprising, but wonderful. It's so nice to know that your children are so loved by someone other than you. "Good morning." Megan smiled at her mother-in-law. "It's so good to have you here. Vivian missed you." "I actually came to see you today. The smile that had been directed at her granddaughter slid off the older woman's face. She stared at her daughter-in-law. Megan immediately tensed, sensing that this was going to be a serious matter. "Go in the living room and watch cartoons." "Okay?" Megan turned to her daughter. She nodded her head and obediently slipped out of the room. She promised her mother and grandmother that they would join her soon to play with the new dolls. Martha and Megan were left alone in the kitchen. "What was that about? What did you want to talk to me about?" Megan asked. Martha didn't answer right away. It was obvious that she was having a hard time starting a conversation. Her mother-in-law sat down on a chair behind the counter that divides the kitchen into two parts. Megan sat across from her. "Do you know that John has been the only person near and dear to me for a long time?" Martha said at last. "Until the grandchildren came along and you." Megan nodded. Of course she knew that. Martha had been pulling her son along on her own, working all her life, making sure the child had everything she needed, and yet not basking in gold, but really raising John, always making time for him. When her husband talked about his childhood, Megan sometimes wondered where Martha, working at such a responsible high position, took the strength to do so much with the child. She went hiking with him, and took him to museums, circuses, theaters, and every evening read books to him, and checked his lessons, and taught him everything around the house from cleaning and cooking to fixing the faucet. It's a tremendous amount of work. Megan realized this fully when she became a mother herself. "I tried to raise John to be a good person. Not only smart and successful, but also reliable and decent, not like his father. For a long time I thought I had succeeded, but the genes seemed to have taken their toll." Martha looked so sad at this point that Megan wanted to hug her, but the gesture wouldn't have been natural for them, so the woman held back. "I never told about John's father, not even to him," he asked, of course, "especially when he was a teenager. I explained to him then that I really wanted a child. Age was pushing it, too. I didn't see any candidates for the role of father of the future baby around me. That's why I went to the resort that summer, to give myself a long-awaited gift. I lied to John then that I specifically made a resort romance there in order to give birth for myself. He wasn't the only one who thought so, by the way I'd announced to everyone that my pregnancy was a conscious move, but it wasn't." Megan was silently catching every word. That frankness. Martha, it had never been so open. Martha was about 35 at the time, by today's standards a very young woman with everything ahead of her. Back then she was considered an old maid. All deadlines for becoming a mother and wife had been missed. The train had left. Martha was not particularly worried about it. She devoted herself fully to her work. She had a responsible position, and there was always a lot to do. The woman liked to realize that she was such an important, indispensable person at the airport. She was respected, listened to, and even feared. Sometimes she regretted that she had not had a child and probably would not have one. But Martha didn't worry about that. She herself had grown up in an orphanage. She had seen so many unhappy fates and was not 100% sure that she could be a good mother and make her baby happy. That summer she was sent on a trip to the sea from the airport. Martha could afford to buy the tickets herself, but the union honored her as Employee of the Year. It's nice to be recognized and appreciated. The sanatorium turned out to be just wonderful. Comfortable room, sea in 5 minutes walk, wonderful dining room in walking distance. And there, in this sanatorium, Martha met her future father, John. It was a so-called business trip. A young guy about 10 years younger than Martha. He came from some northern town to work. It was Alex's first time at sea, and at first he looked a little dazed. It was even cute when Martha first noticed him in the dining room. The young man caught her eye immediately. He was good, really good, hair the color of ripe wheat, bright blue eyes. Those eyes would eventually play a key role in Martha's fate. He had amazing eyes, and I guess they were the reason I fell in love with him like a girl. I don't think I'd ever experienced anything like that even in my youth. Bottomless, bright blue, attentive. John inherited them. Richard and Stephen too, by the way. Alex had no idea he had a son and grandchildren, and that they had his eyes. Martha was now looking everywhere with her eyes for the handsome boy. At first she didn't understand why she did it, but he was a young man, so he was sure he would soon have no shortage of admirers like himself, young, lovely creatures. And so it was. For several days, Martha watched from afar as Alex returned to the sanatorium with one and another beauty. All of them were just like a selection slim, tanned, smiling. Alex smiled a lot himself. He had a wonderful smile. From it, the guy had charming dimples on his cheeks. One day, the young, handsome man himself approached Martha. Alex confessed to me that he had been watching me for a long time. He's incredibly attracted to me. It was unexpected to hear that. A young, handsome guy, whom I had been admiring from afar for about a week, was giving me compliments that made my head spin. I was desperately jealous of all those young beauties with whom he appeared in the sanatorium. And he, it turns out, at the same time dreamed of me and did not dare to approach, did not dare, because he was afraid of rejection. According to him, I looked beautiful and inaccessible. Martha began a stormy resort romance. They walked a lot in the neighborhood, swam at night in the sea, laughed. Martha felt 10 to 15 years younger next to him. It seemed she had never laughed so much even in her youth. It's been a wonderful week. I fell in love. I just lost my head, which doesn't usually happen to me. It was so unlike me. Alex had me under a spell, and I didn't notice a lot of things, a lot of obvious things. Martha always paid for her companion in cafes, at the canteen, on excursions. He never gave her anything, she never expected it. Being around this guy was a gift in itself. Then one day Martha woke up in her room, expecting to see Alex next to her. They'd taken a long walk along the night promenade, gazing at the stars, talking about everything, and had fallen asleep with their arms around each other in the morning. Martha felt so happy and peaceful in the arms of her lover. But when she woke up, she didn't see Alex beside her. Martha stretched and rolled over onto her other side. She was still not alert for anything. This had happened before. Alex had probably just gone out for coffee and pastries to surprise her. How nice it was to have someone care for you like that. Martha dozed for another half an hour, enjoying the peace and quiet. But the longer she was alone, the more she realized something was wrong. Finally, the woman, unable to bear the anxiety any longer, got up, and then everything became clear. Alex's belongings were gone, not his clothes, not his favorite wristwatch. He'd even remembered to bring a little thing like perfume and a toothbrush. So Alex left while Martha was asleep. He left quietly, so as not to wake the woman and explain himself to her. Why was everything fine yesterday? A wave of longing and despair and resentment swept into Martha. It became difficult to breathe. She wandered around the room and could not find a place to go. Her heart clenched with unbearable pain. Martha thought she had found her soulmate. Alex had been so easy for her, so pleasant. Even though he was much younger, Martha felt supported by him. Nothing had foreshadowed this outcome. Just last night, Alex had hugged her tightly, showering her with kisses and compliments. He was seriously planning a future together. The guy lived in a small town in the north. He even called Martha to go there, and she was ready to give up her career, apartment, friends, everything, just to be near him. In desperation, Martha opened her closets again and again. Maybe Alex had just moved his things? What about himself? Maybe he was late for some reason. But Alex's clothes were nowhere to be found. Martha noticed some of her own things were missing. A box of gold jewelry. Martha had taken a small part of her tame jewelry on vacation, but they were her favorite 2 pairs of earrings, a dainty chain, and a bracelet with small sapphires. Original, exquisite pieces that you couldn't buy in every store. Martha's bracelet was imported from Germany. Now this jewelry box has disappeared. There was no half-empty bottle of Chanel No. 5 on the shelf in the bathroom. In the safe closet, the woman was missing 3-year-old dresses, which she bought when she was on vacation in Riga. Her heart clenched with a bad feeling. So is Alex just a criminal? I should probably write a report to the police. On the other hand, it was shameful to have to confess to strangers that she had lost her head in the arms of a young traitor and trusted him blindly. And a grown woman boss. Even Martha sat down on the sofa, hugged herself tightly, and began to sway. That's what she used to do when she was just a little girl. Martha had grown up in an orphanage. There you couldn't get comfort and sympathy from adults. So the girl got into the habit of hugging herself when she became an adult. Martha somehow outgrew this ritual, and in a moment of stress and despair, the habit returned. It was necessary to leave the stuffy room and take a walk along the shore. The fresh sea breeze would give strength and bring relief. Martha walked to the front door and noticed a note. Alex had left her some kind of message on the mirror. The heart glad for three fed a faint hope that everything would still be fine. Maybe the young man is just preparing some kind of surprise. And here she almost went crazy with worry. But the miracle didn't happen. Alex did run away, only for some reason it was important for him to explain his behavior to Marta. You've probably figured it out by now. Are you crying? You look at me, scolding yourself for being so gullible. I don't know why I'm writing all this. Usually I just leave. But you're really special. I can't do what I do to others. I really like you. You're strong and noble. You're also really beautiful. Probably any man would be happy with you, but not me. I realized a long time ago that my happiness is different from the idea of a prosperous life of most people. I like adventure, a change of location, meeting new people. I realized long ago that I can never be with one single woman. Family, children. Everyday life is not for me. That's the way I was born. My mother says I took after my father. I never knew him, by the way. He's also a vagabond, an adventurer. Probably this man does not even know of my existence. It doesn't matter. Of course I haven't told you a word of the truth. Well, almost know the fact that you are very beautiful, smart, strong. I really think so. Those words of mine were sincere. As for my biography, I named the wrong city. I lied about my age. My name isn't even Alex. That's my favorite part of making up a cover story, pretending to be someone else. Some people think of me as a young actor, some as a talented young engineer. It all depends on the inspiration. Sometimes it comes to me and I compose a story about a tragic fate. It is fascinating, interesting, exciting. And women like it. I know how to make them happy, even if only for a short time. Those burning eyes of yours, those admiring glances. I make the gray, everyday life of single ladies bright, colorful, magical. And for all this in life, you have to pay. That's why I charge a small fee for happy weeks and days. You have to admit, it's only fair. Our week was one of the happiest weeks of your life, wasn't it? I'm moving on. New adventures, new stories. And you? No offense. You're really special to me. I usually leave in silence, I don't leave notes. But I wanted to explain myself to you. Martha hurried on, staring at the piece of paper, the reading hard to fit in her head. Alex, who isn't even Alex, is a professional Alfonso, living off women, flitting through life like a careless moth. He plays different roles and enjoys it. Most likely we are talking about some kind of special mental disorder. But a normal person can't live like that. Strangest of all, after reading the note, Martha agreed with Alex. The guy was right. This week was really the brightest and happiest in her life. Martha decided to keep this story in the depths of her memory, sometimes to come back to it again, to feel those bright, positive emotions that Alex gave her. But it turned out differently. When Martha returned from vacation, she realized that she was expecting a child. I realized that it was Alex's child, a man who was probably not quite mentally healthy, but I decided to keep it because, first of all, I was tired of being all alone, and secondly, probably I still loved Alex. Or rather, the image that that young man had created. At the due date, a wonderful, healthy, and strong boy was born. He had Alex's eyes. Martha had noticed that back in the hospital. The handsome, charming baby inherited other features of his father's appearance. He bore little resemblance to Martha. The woman prayed that the son's resemblance to Alexei would be limited to external features. Martha, knowing about the genes inherited by John, therefore paid special attention to the upbringing of her son. She developed responsibility, honesty, and kindness in him, and John seemed to grow up to be a wonderful guy. Martha anxiously searched for the traits of a reckless adventurer, as his father was, but did not find them. John faithfully did his homework, never skipped classes at school, and then at the university. When the boy grew up, Martha watched his relationships with girls with bated breath. But even here, John did not resemble Alex. Before Megan, the guy dated a former classmate. They were a couple for several years in a row. No torrid short-term affairs. When her son married Megan, Martha exhaled. It's okay. John has a beautiful wife, great kids, his own business. No, the son is nothing like the character of a careless Alfonso father. It was a success, but it turned out I'd been too early. Martha shook her head. Now I'm going to have to tell you the bitter and ugly truth about John. I kept silent while it was none of my business. Went through everything inside me. But now the welfare of my grandchildren is at stake. I can't let them be left with nothing. Megan realized what she was about to talk about. To make it easier for her mother-in-law, she spoke up. I know he's cheating on me. John has a young mistress. I've seen them together and even read the sweet couple's correspondence. Really? Martha's eyebrows rose in surprise. And why didn't you scandalize him? How did you even survive it? I'm just at a loss, Megan admitted. Having someone to talk to made her feel better. Yes, it was John's mother. But Megan sensed that she was completely on her side. I see. Martha nodded. Anybody would be confused. So you know about this, Catherine? Megan nodded, then asked. But how did you know about it? John told me, Martha said. He said he'd been unhappily married for a long time. That you, as his wife, didn't pay any attention to him. You'd lost yourself and the children in the house, become uninterested and indifferent. The usual male excuses. It was painful to realize that the only child in which so much invested in is capable of such a thing. Apparently, the genes still took their toll. Though not immediately, Megan could barely hold back her tears. But maybe he's right. I did have a lot to do with the kids in the house. Maybe John really did lack attention. I wish we had talked about it in time. He's wrong, Martha said flatly. There's more to it than that. Sometimes the feeling goes away. It happens, and it's normal, but this is different. John is lying to you, cheating on you, and that's the worst part. He and Catherine are going to leave you with nothing. You and the kids. How? Megan gasped. She was used to the idea of John cheating on her, and here was a new shock. It seemed to her that her husband adored children and would do anything to provide them with a happy future. And now this. Although these hints about preparing for divorce, this is their plan. It's sad. Martha shook her head. When I heard him, I wanted to give up the plan and my son right away. But then I decided to keep my emotions to myself. If I didn't agree, they'd think of something else. John felt like a happy man. He had achieved a lot in life, built a whole mini-empire, organized a network of plumbing stores. The man had a right to be proud of himself. His family life up to now, everything suited him: a beautiful wife, wonderful children, well-adjusted life. It was a kind of quest to get for the family funds, buy a new car, change the apartment to a large house. And then these tasks somehow ceased to fascinate and bring joy. It became too easy. John no longer needed money. They were enough for new acquisitions, and for traveling, and for children's education. The man suddenly got bored, and then just at this very moment, in his life appeared Catherine, young and energetic, loving adventures and adventures. She worked as a saleswoman in one of his stores. One evening, John stopped by the store to talk to the accountant, but the woman was no longer at work. Behind the counter, however, stood a new saleswoman, incredibly beautiful. She's openly flirting with the boss. But how can you resist? No, at first John resisted his feelings. His mother from childhood brought up in him responsibility, hammered into his head the true values of the family, so it was difficult for a man to make this step. But when it happened, John realized that all these years he had lived in the captivity of his own attitudes. With Catherine, John felt young and energetic again. She was as adventurous and capable of abnormal behavior as he was. Existence without this girl now seemed to John bland and boring. So it went on for several years. Feelings did not subside, on the contrary, flared up with renewed vigor. John was literally bewitched by his young, beautiful mistress. He did not want to part with her for a moment, but every or almost every evening he had to return to the boring Megan. The very atmosphere of the house, once warm and cozy, was weighing on John. He felt like he was in a prison. The lovers talked more and more about John needing to divorce Megan. It was a done deal. True, both of them did not want one thing: that half of all the property accumulated during the years of marriage passed into the ownership of the legal spouse. She wasn't working, was she? Catherine was indignant. She sat at home, cooking borscht, relaxing, watching soap operas while you worked. In justice, all property should belong to you and only you. That's true, John sighed. But the law is the law, Megan will be given half of the property acquired during the marriage. But isn't there a loophole in those laws? You're in a position to hire a good lawyer to figure something out. And one day there was a loophole. It was simple and complicated at the same time. It was suggested by a lawyer who was familiar with such issues. "I have already had such cases in practice," said a man in a stylish suit. "You need to sign over all the property to a person you trust. And your wife should trust him too. Maybe a close friend or relative." My clients explain this to spouses to preserve assets in case of business problems. Everyone has their own theory, and then you can initiate divorce proceedings. There is no property, there is nothing to divide, and the trusted person, after everything, just rewrites houses, apartments, cars on the already divorced spouse, that is, on you. That's it. John thought for a long time. After this conversation, he had only one candidate for the role of such a trustee: his mother. Megan would easily agree to sign over all the property to her. She trusts her mother-in-law, but how to go to her mother with such a request? She would have to confess everything to her, and yet there was no other way. John decided to have a serious conversation. He realized his mother would not be happy about the situation. But she's his mother, she will support her son and help him. It was a shame to give Megan half of what he earned. Especially since Megan did not work, lived a quiet and relaxed life. What right does she have to all this? Martha listened to her son in silence, not interrupting. As always, she looked unperturbed and somewhat detached. The only thing that betrayed the older woman's anxiety was her fingers, which tugged relentlessly at the long sleeve of her sweater. "Have you made up your mind?" Martha asked when her son had finished. Yes, he nodded. "Ew. Don't you feel sorry for Megan?" "I've fallen out of love with her. She's clearly indifferent to me. What are we going to do? Spend the rest of our lives together? What about assets? She hasn't invested a dime in the house or anything else. So that's fair. I was the only one working. She provided for you," Martha reminded me. "And she raised your children. Thanks to Karina, you could think of nothing else but the development of the business. She always took care of the rest. And remember Megan at first, she helped you a lot. Doing those reports at night, doing those estimates. That's when you got a staff of accountants." "You're exaggerating, Mom. You're exaggerating what she did." "All right, and the children?" It was obvious that Marta was struggling to keep it together. "What about the children? Am I going to pay child support for them? That's how I'll help them." "So you'll help me?" After a short silence, Martha nodded her head. John could see in her eyes that her mother didn't approve of what he was doing. Well, he hadn't expected anything else. The important thing was that she agreed. John signed over all the property to Martha. Megan did not suspect anything. She immediately believed in the fairy tale that John, in this way, just avoid unnecessary risks. Megan hadn't been paying much attention to anything lately. All her time and attention was devoted to her young daughter. Well, all the better. Catherine was as excited as a child. You bet, because everything was going so smoothly, without a hitch. It seemed to open up a happy, carefree future ahead. Catherine and John planned to celebrate their success with a trip to the sea. They had already chosen a resort, even argued a little about it. One day, when all the property was already rewritten to Martha, John dared to have a frank conversation with Megan. The man, of course, was worried. All the same to inform the person, with whom he lived so many years, such news, not very pleasant. But Megan took it all surprisingly calmly. Naive woman, apparently has not yet realized that she will not get anything in the divorce. She wouldn't find out until the courtroom, and even if she finds out sooner, there's nothing she can do about it. John officially moved into the apartment he'd rented for Catherine. Now it was just the two of them, waiting for the court hearing after which Megan would have to leave home. In the very apartment where they lived before John succeeded, on the street, the ex-wife and daughter will not stay. And the boys, they're already living in another city. Independent young men. You don't have to worry about them at all. And now, finally, the day has come. John and Catherine have waited so long for this date. Today, at last, it will be over. John will get freedom. A little later, will sign everything from his mother to himself, and the sweet couple will fly to the beach with white soft sand. Catherine decided to go to the meeting with her beloved. She wore an elegant suit, emphasizing the advantages of her luxurious figure. made light makeup, let her hair down. John once again admired the beautiful beloved. Yes, she looked like a supermodel from the cover of a magazine. In his youth, John had never dreamed of such girls, and here he was, a stunning beauty in love with him. In the conference room, John noticed Megan at once. She looked surprisingly calm and dignified. For some reason, Martha was sitting next to her, wearing the suit she had worn as an airport employee on the days when she needed luck. His mother's presence confused John. He wondered why she was here. She's sitting next to Megan. Come to support her sister-in-law. Odd, considering their plan. Catherine tensed at the sight of her future mother-in-law. She disliked Martha. She realized that the older woman was not happy that the young girl had broken up her son's tight-knit family. So what? What did her opinion matter? Absolutely none, she thought. Martha greeted her son and his companion with a nod of her head. Megan, on the other hand, said hello loud and friendly, even smiled. The hearing began. The judge read the divorce decree, determined the place of residence of the minor daughter with her mother, and announced the amount of alimony that must now be paid monthly on Vivian John. And then it came to the most important thing of all, property. Since you don't share any property, there is nothing to divide, the judge concluded. The wife's marital home remains hers. In general, that's not all. What about the gift? Martha spoke from her seat. As for your gift, it's not a subject for a court of law. What gift deed? John jumped up, his heart clenched with misgivings. Catherine, sitting next to him, smiled happily. She did not suspect anything yet. A deed of gift for all your family's property, which I made out to Megan, Martha replied, looking pointedly at her son, Megan, and the grandchildren. What did you think? I'm going to leave them on the street with nothing, so you can have a nice life while they all live in a cramped apartment. John's eyes blurred. Such a man did not expect such a mother. He looked at Catherine, beautiful face. The girl skewed. There was an evil grimace. She opened and closed her mouth in surprise. She tried to say something, but not a single word escaped her tongue. She even seemed to be out of breath. Megan looked calm and peaceful. The judge read out some more formalities regarding the divorce. Martha was whispering about something with her sister-in-law, and it was slowly dawning on John that it was over. Of course, Catherine would leave him now. She would not stay with him through the hard times. That's for sure. She would have to start all over again. All over again.